So Everyday Spy it's my vision of how we bring practical, tangible spy skills out of espionage and apply them in everyday life to give people an unfair advantage. An unfair advantage in business, an unfair advantage in relationships, in their career, in their personal security, and securing their family. Because as much as we were just talking about how everybody wants a fair opportunity, there's only one thing people want more than a fair opportunity. They want an unfair opportunity.
That's right.
Right? And that's when you understand that concept, when you're the kind of person that's nodding as we are having this conversation, you're the right kind of customer for Everyday Spy. Right. Because it's all about giving people an unfair advantage by giving them a skill or teaching them some bit of knowledge that's reserved for secret intelligence officers.
Right.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer.
Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com.
Andrew Bustamante, welcome to the What is Money Show.
I appreciate it, man. I'm really excited to be here. I've seen your work for a long time. I think your topic is super interesting. And the question of what is money, I mean, that's a question that goes all the way back to the farm for me when I was still going through like initial training at CIA. So I think it's a fantastic title and a great topic.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel very fortunate to have stumbled upon it right when world history seems to be dealing with that question a lot right now, not only with Bitcoin, but also with CBDCs, et cetera. And I'm especially excited to have you today because you are the first guest ever in our new studio here in Nashville, Tennessee.
This is an awesome studio too, man. I felt like... I feel pretty special sitting down. And then when you told me I was the first guest here too, I was like, oh, let's get comfortable.
Yes. And you got the red carpet treatment. We tried to do the steak lunch beforehand and we wanted to create an experience for guests rather than just sticking people in front of a mic. So
yeah, it's working, brother.
Awesome. Love to hear that. Just by way of quick introduction for my audience, you are a former covert CIA intelligence officer. And you've got a very interesting background, very interesting history. Maybe we could start with a little bit of that, just how you got to now. And then I would also like to hear a little bit about your business, The Everyday Spy, which you've got on your shirt there.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And my background is not that different, I think, from your average American, really. I grew up in a kind of a rural town in Pennsylvania. Wanted an option, right? And when you grow up in rural America, there's not always a lot of options. Mm-hmm. And the time came that I had to start thinking about college and what was the future going to look like. And my parents didn't have a college savings for me, and we were basically a military veteran family. So it was always very clear to me that I was either going to go into the military or I was going to get a local job after high school, right? The idea of student debt and loans and college, that wasn't built into the psyche of my family, not in 1998 when I was graduating, right? But I was fortunate enough that in my high school, I learned about the military academies, West Point, Air Force Academy, Annapolis, and I kind of took a liking to that idea of going to a military university. It's still the military, but it's also university, and being the first university graduate in my family was a very appealing idea to me. So that's actually where I went, and I was fortunate to get nominated by a senator, which is one of the hardest requirements to get into a military academy. I hated every day of being a military college student, and to anybody out there who's been to a military academy, they understand exactly what I'm talking about. But it was great. It created exactly the opportunity I needed. Right now, forever, I have that on my resume. I have that network. I have that kind of that connection to the Air Force Academy. And that was a big part of what ultimately led to CIA recruiting me out of the Air Force, because I had this academy education. I had foreign languages. I learned Chinese. I majored in foreign area studies when I was at the academy. And then anytime they have an opportunity to recruit somebody who they've basically groomed from the age of 17, right? Because my first application package really went into them when I was 16 and a half years old. The Air Force, the military, has known me since I was a kid. So all of that kind of came together in 2007 when I was invited by CIA to come up to Langley for interviews.
Very cool. You said you got a senatorial recommendation? How did that happen, and what was that about?
Well, the way that it works to get into a military academy is you have to meet certain requirements academically, physically, et cetera, et cetera. But there's this wild card where you also have to be nominated by either a senator, a congressperson, or the vice president of the United States. So, and that makes it very difficult because each senator and each congressperson has a limited number of people they can nominate each year. And then depending on how many students they have nominated who are still in the academy, that number goes down. So I really just got lucky, dude, because I was working at a golf, like Caddyshack kind of restaurant. Yeah. And we had two senators who were in our same hometown who golfed at that golf course and ate at that restaurant. And I was a busboy and like a short order cook at the restaurant, and the owner just liked me. So once the owner found out I was thinking about going to a military academy, every time the senators came in, every time the Congress people came in, he always pulled me out from the back and was like, "This is Andy, and Andy's going to try to get into an academy, and he's a great guy, but he's going to need your help because he needs a nomination." And I used to be so embarrassed about it until it worked, right? Until all of a sudden, the time came that I had to submit my package, and I submitted my package, and I got an invite to come to the seat at the Capitol in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and actually sit and interview with a senator. And it was just mind-boggling that I got that opportunity when other people didn't.
Wow.
The reason I love the idea of your show and the mission that you're on to talk about what is money is because the one lesson that CIA taught me above all other lessons is that if you have the ability to create opportunity, you never have to be the one waiting for it. And what money really is opportunity. That's really what money gives you, right? And that's why everybody's on a hunt for more money, whether they're poverty-stricken or whether they're wealthy. Everybody wants more money. Even the asshole out there that says, "Oh, can I cuss on your show?"
Of course.
Did.
Yes.
Even the
all
asshole
about
out
freedom
there,
here.
Yeah. Who says money doesn't matter. Money's not important, right?
Probably has a full-time job, right?
And push that guy a little bit further or push that gal a little bit further, and guess what they're going to say? Eventually, they're going to say, "Well, if I wanted to do that, I need more money."
Yeah.
Right? So there becomes this friction point because we all really do see money as opportunity. We just don't want to call it that.
Yeah. No, that's a great framing, actually. We often describe money as like a tool of optionality, right? It can be used as an option to acquire any good or service in the marketplace, but that's very synonymous with opportunity, right? Money is the freedom to mobilize human energy towards some aim you might have, right? Whether that's a business or a charity, whatever it may be.
Yeah. I mean, you're exercising your option for more comfort when you buy new shoes.
Yes.
You're exercising your option for more confidence when you buy a nice suit. Right? You're exercising your option to control your social status when you buy a nice car.
That's right.
Right? I mean, that's what we're doing, is we are buying ourselves an option.
Yeah.
I know I am certainly, with my business, I am absolutely on a mission to grow and build wealth.
Yes.
And I don't hide that. I'm not embarrassed by that. I don't think that's shameful.
Yeah.
Because any wealth I build gives me options, but it also gives my wife options. It gives my kids options.
Right.
It gives the legacy I leave behind options. Because guess what I didn't have when I was a rural 16-year-old student in Pennsylvania? I had no fucking options. I don't want to leave that behind. That's not the legacy I want to leave.
Right.
We have the chance to change that.
Yes.
Forever.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody listening right now has a chance to change the legacy that was handed down to them forever.
Yes. No, it was very, very inspiring. And I think that's an original answer to the question, what is money? Actually, is something like liquid opportunity. It does afford you that. And so what does that say about a lot of people in the world saying that we need equality of opportunity, at least? Now, equality of outcome, anyone that's clamoring for that, I think you're fundamentally wrong. Like, the only place humans are equal is in the grave, as I often say. We're all unequal, and that's what's magical about humans, that we get to capitalize on our relative skill sets, and that's what the division of labor is and all these things in the marketplace. But what if money is opportunity? What does that say about equality of opportunity? Because obviously money is not distributed equally. So how do those two concepts relate? Money as opportunity to equality of opportunity.
So I'm going to say right out that I am not always popular. My answers are not always the popular answer.
You're in the perfect place. We're often unpopular as well.
I think first we need to abandon this idea of equality. Equality is a fictional concept, right? It's not what people think it is. It's not what some people promise it to be. It certainly isn't used as a term. It isn't used in a consistent way. Sometimes people talk about equality when they mean equity. Sometimes they talk about equality when they mean fairness. Sometimes they talk about equality when they actually mean equality. So it's always different. But if you kind of disband the idea, America and the Western world was not founded on the concept of equality. Let's be very honest. America happened because a bunch of pilgrims, a bunch of poor folks in the UK had no fucking opportunity in the UK for property, for land, for anything. So they signed a contract to basically take a dangerous trip across the ocean to create settlements in the new world that would create resources and produce and products that would then go back to the old world. And in exchange for them taking the risk, they were granted first rights to land and salaries and everything else, right? It wasn't like they were trying to flee religious persecution. That's a story that we're told that is inaccurate. There was an element of religion that was going along with it, but at the core, they were entrepreneurs.
Sure.
Right? They were indentured servants with an opportunistic spirit. That's what it would take to spend 3 months crossing the ocean in, the 1800s. That's nuts, right? In the 1700s.
Yeah.
Even before that.
Yeah.
So that's where we were founded. Our government and our constitution was drafted by white landowning men.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And it's not because they were white, and it's not because they were men. The reason it was crafted was because they were land owning.
Right.
What is a land owner? Somebody who's invested, right? Somebody who sees the land as an opportunity. When you're talking to somebody in society who is not invested, they don't own property, they don't run a business, they don't invest their money in the market, they're not connected, they're not invested. They can never be equal to somebody who is invested.
Right.
They have different incentives, they have different intentions, they are not
skin in the game, right?
They have no skin in the game.
Yeah.
Right? Would you ever trust somebody to play on your favorite football team if they didn't wear the jersey and they weren't part of the team? Like a freelancer on the team?
Yeah.
Like, you don't know that person's going to throw the game or what they're going to do. right? So we have to let go of this idea of equality and understand that what we're really looking for is fairness.
Yes.
We're looking for someone to treat us fairly,
Yeah.
and we're looking for a fair opportunity to demonstrate our values, our capabilities, and our interests in whatever we're interested in, whether that's art or wealth development or, geopolitics.
Yes.
What we hate is when we don't get the opportunity because we call that unfair.
Yes. No, I think that's a wonderful way to decompose it, because it is, I often say it's more about equality of the rules, but that is effectively fairness, right? We want a level playing field. We want to all be equal in the eyes of the law. For instance, we all want private property rights. Like, as long as the playing field is level, then you can let the players demonstrate their inequality, right? Like, someone's really good at building a business, someone's really good at agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. And then through trade, we all get to enjoy the best fruits of one another's labor. So that's the magic of the marketplace. But the problem is the distortion of rules. That's
and the suppression of natural skill and talent.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, most of the folks who watch you, who see you, who learn from you, will probably never get the chance to meet you. And one of the things that I didn't realize is how massively large you are. So when I walked in, right, I've seen hours of your footage, right? I've seen pictures of you everywhere. You don't smile very often, so it's kind of cool to see you smile too. But damn, dude, you are huge, right? Your arms are probably as big around as my thighs, and you're tall, like you're a big guy.
I'm laughing because I got a lot of this in Miami recently. I just got back and people were like, damn, you're way bigger than I thought you were.
But to force you, to suppress you physically so that I have the opportunity to compete against your natural physical abilities doesn't make us better.
Right.
It doesn't. All it does is pull back the benefits we could get from you.
Yes.
And then it forces me to try to maintain your natural skill sets. What would be much better is to pair us as a team.
Yeah.
Let you do what you're naturally good at. Let me do what I'm naturally good at. We're reducing the number of net vulnerabilities between the two of us.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we live in a time, and especially in a government right now, where the divide that we're seeing, and I would argue that we're seeing much more of a socioeconomic divide than a political divide or a racial divide. But in that socioeconomic divide, you basically have landowners and non-landowners.
Yeah.
So what do landowners want? They want to double down. They want to invest. They want to work hard. They're invested in making the most out of the land. And what do non-landowners want? They want equality. They want fairness.
Yeah.
They want someone to clip the wings on the big athlete so that they have a chance to carry the football every now and then.
Yeah, and the sports analogy is amazing, because if we did that in sports, no one would fucking watch the sports. Like, who wants to clip LeBron's wings so he scores the most points as the lowest scoring player?
Yep.
Like, who would watch that? And it's not a productive enterprise. It's a pointless enterprise. And the same principle applies to the market, right? If you're going to clip the wings of the most productive or the most successful, right, tax the rich or whatever it may be, that's not going to help everyone. That's actually going to hurt everyone. So you're going to reduce the incentives to be productive. And it's the productivity that improves the quality of our lives.
I was actually listening to a news story recently on a liberal news station. So one of the things I do is I listen to both liberal news and conservative news, as well as foreign news. And that's a tool that I use to try to always stay ahead of finding fake news or disinformation or misinformation. And there was a news story on a liberal news station that was talking about a university. I want to say it was somewhere in the South, may have been somewhere on the East Coast, that was lobbying to allow transgender men to play on the university's female teams. Right? And right away, what went through my head is basically what's probably going through your head. And I was like, there is no way that an 18-year-old man, even if he thinks he's a woman,
that's right,
there's no way that he, like, genetically, physically, can be fairly pitted against a true female, even a very talented athletic female. There's no way that that's a fair match. And if you let that kind of thing happen, there's going to be outrage. There's not outrage about the gender, identity, but outrage because what happens when that male, that transgender female, athlete wins the state championship in tennis against a female who's born female.
Right.
Is that fair? Is that really cultivating the best athletes in America, what does that mean for the Olympic Games? What does that mean for... So the sports analogy is one that came to mind because I heard that story and I was not outraged, but just frankly disappointed.
Yeah.
What an incredible, discouraging thing to hear as a father and as a sports fan and as an American who's looking to cultivate the strongest America possible.
And as a rational human being, right? There are differences between men and women biologically that are inarguable. The letters that came to mind when you brought that up were WTF. Basically, every time I hear that. I think it's Matt Walsh. I heard this story that there was I'll try to tell this correctly. It was a trans male EMT that thought he was a female, and he was addressing Mr. Walsh in an event, and he was saying that the old biological categories of man and woman were antiquated, and that there were new biological categories of, whatever, LGBTQ plus. And Matt Walsh responded, he goes, no, that's categorically, fundamentally wrong. He goes, for instance, you're an EMT, right? He goes, so if a biological man who said he was a woman called you as an EMT and said he was having a miscarriage, would you check him? Would you check him biologically, like for the miscarriage? And the EMT was like taken aback. He's like, well, no. Because he's like, exactly, categorically. There are categorically fundamental differences between man and woman. It's not open for debate. It's not open for argument. It's not open for reinterpretation. It's biological reality.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about giving people the equal opportunity to identify with whatever gender they want to identify with, I don't see a problem with giving people the opportunity to identify.
Sure.
But let's ask ourselves the question, what is happening that is making that question so common?
Yes.
What sociologically is happening to us that's making us ask a question that the third world doesn't ask?
Yes, right.
That our other developing nations don't ask, right? Why is it that we have such a large component of Americans who are confused about their gender?
Yes.
When we don't have that happening in Africa or Latin America or China.
And we've seen this obsession with gender fluidity in ancient Rome before it collapsed. We saw it in the Weimar Republic before it collapsed. So it's an open connection. I don't know how the connection actually works, but it seems like end of empire / near hyperinflation tends to somehow encourage people to have these weird obsessions about gender fluidity. And I'm with you. Like, if you want to call yourself, if you want to identify as a flag or a motorcycle or a he or a she, whatever, I don't care, actually. And you can ask for me to refer to you as whatever that thing is, and I can consent or I can not consent. What you cannot do is coerce people to play pretend with you. Even kids know this, right? If a kid comes into a group of kids and says, you're the alligator, you're the shark, and I'm the tiger, and the kids are like, well, I want to be the helicopter, so you can't tell me what to be. That's how the world works, right? You can play all the pretend you want, but at the end of the day, the pretend play has to be consensual. Otherwise, it doesn't function.
And it has to be productive. Like, I feel like that's a big piece that gets left out of the argument. If somebody wants to self-identify as a helicopter, a motorcycle, a male, a female, whatever. I knew a friend in the military who self-identified as they were transgender female. So they were female. They believed they were male, but they also believed they were a gay male because they still had sexual attraction to males, right?
Full circle, right?
Right. Which is fine. But what I want to make sure people understand is however you want to self-identify, let's just make sure that we're focused on being as productive as possible in whatever role we've self-identified.
Yes.
Oftentimes what ends up happening is we're losing the productivity because we're so busy self-identifying or defending what we've identified as or defending people's rights to identify that we're losing the productive piece. You know how countries are measured? GDP.
Yeah.
What about this conversation is advancing our productivity?
That's right.
ESG is a great example of something that I personally am a fan of ESG. I don't think it's a super revolutionary concept that's going to make us a better society. I love the fact that ESG is literally nothing that commands a premium price. It's policy and hours of debate and conversation, but real attorneys get paid real money by real firms to make ESG legislation, right? And to make companies ESG certified. That's actual GDP. That's actual fiscal contribution that's being made because real money is exchanging hands, even though there is no real product, right? that to me that's what makes America amazing, is that we find ways to incentivize the monetary exchange for non-tangential goods.
Interesting.
Monetary policy, financial institutions, information, digital products. Like we're masters at this, and it's what keeps us ahead of the competition.
Yeah, I would agree on the intangibles in the American economy. Like Bitcoin's a great example, something that's intangible but extremely valuable. The goodwill of business combinations, brand recognition, etc. I'm less inclined to agree with ESG and regulation, though. I think that's, as an admitted anarcho-capitalist, right? I think there's little to no justifiable role for imposed regulation. I think most of it can be done consensually. I think all of the imposed regulation is a net decrement to productivity, because you have people, the attorneys you mentioned, like they're creating laws and imposing them on people that if the laws were actually necessary, that people would consent to create them for themselves. So I guess I'm less inclined to agree on that particular point, but
it's a fair point. That's a fair objective, what you're saying,
yeah.
Right? Let the people decide.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting too, because there are
back to the original point before that, actually what I wanted to say was, whatever you want to self-identify as, above all, respect the freedom and sovereignty of the individual. If someone doesn't want to identify with you or play pretend with you, then respect that.
Yeah. And
that's all we're saying here is like, honor the individual, honor their sovereignty, honor their freedom. That's what creates the best world.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. No, you're good, man. That's, if we can focus on that individual productivity, if we can focus on that individual contribution, we're going to find ourselves getting along a whole lot more than we don't get along.
Yeah, agreed completely. Let's talk about your shirt here, the Everyday Spy. This is your business.
Mm-hmm.
What is Everyday Spy? Is this where I can go to spy school and finally become the American James Bond I've always wanted to be?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, yeah, that is kind of what it is. So Everyday Spy is it's my vision of how we bring practical, tangible spy skills out of espionage and apply them in everyday life to give people an unfair advantage. An unfair advantage in business, an unfair advantage in relationships, in their career, in their personal security, and securing their family. Because as much as we were just talking about how everybody wants a fair opportunity, there's only one thing people want more than a fair opportunity. They want an unfair opportunity.
That's right.
Right? And that's when you understand that concept, when you're the kind of person that's nodding as we are having this conversation, you're the right kind of customer for Everyday Spy.
Right.
Because it's all about giving people an unfair advantage by giving them a skill or teaching them some bit of knowledge that's reserved for secret intelligence officers.
Right.
And that knowledge is powerful because CIA has developed all of their skill sets, and not all of their skill sets have to do with classified information,
Mm-hmm.
but we've developed all of our skill sets over the course of almost 250 years because we took the best of what MI6 did before us. We applied their skill sets to our skill sets, and then we've partnered since the beginning of the OSS during World War II with Mossad. We've partnered with the Canadian Intelligence Service. We've got a Five Eyes group that's comprised of the 5 Western intelligence services. We've continued to refine this craft of espionage, but we only use it for one purpose: stealing secrets from foreign countries.
Statecraft.
And that is a very niche place to use it, right? It's shocking to me, and it was very shocking and insightful to me when I left CIA. I tried to leave the skills behind, like so many of us do. When you have a bad breakup or when you leave a job, you try to just erase the past and start all over again. When I left CIA in 2014, I was like, I got to leave all that behind and start all over again. But I couldn't, because I had this giant black hole in my professional history that couldn't be filled, because CIA has a requirement for how much you can and can't share about your background. So here I am trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life, and I'm unemployed for 6 months. My wife is unemployed because she was also former CIA. We're living in my in-laws' garage with a 6-month-old.
Wow.
It was,
oh my gosh.
It was humiliating, man. I'm 37 years old. It was absolutely humiliating. And that's when it kind of struck me. I was like, I'm trying to do this the fair way.
Yeah.
CIA taught me how to lie, steal, cheat, hack, fake my way into any government organization, any company in the world.
Yeah.
Why don't I just use those skills to get a job now? And it worked.
Wow.
And then when it worked, I was like, there's something here. And then I just kept using the skills on the job.
Yeah.
And it turned into, annual promotions. It turned into more responsibility. It turned into a fantastic reputation in the corporate environment. It also turned into real productivity because I was bringing these skills into a corporate environment. And the company I was working for at the time was CVS Health.
Okay.
CVS Health, when they hired me, they were a growing acquisition-based company. They were 13 in the Fortune top 100. By the time I left 4 years later, they were Fortune 7. And every office that I touched, every place that I went, I applied more spy skills into how that office was running, how it was operating, how it was hiring, how it was spending, how it was negotiating, and transforming the power of the company. And when you're in a corporate environment and you're getting paid $170,000 a year and you're on par for a 20% annual bonus at the end of the year, that's all well and good, but you're also making a bunch of money for someone else. And that's when it kind of struck me. I was like, I could teach these skills to anybody and just keep the money myself.
Right.
And be on my way towards wealth because money is opportunity.
Yes.
And that's where Everyday Spy was born.
What a super cool story. Wow. So you're taking then, what is the category of the tools that have been developed over time? This is psychological tools, I'm sure, negotiating tactics, I'm not sure what else. These things have been refined over centuries, and now you are releasing them or making them available to a wider audience that's not engaged in statecraft per se, but could be engaged in any pursuit, entrepreneurial, presumably.
Right. So the way that the skills are kind of broken up, there's a national security triangle, and it's not easy to find, but it's out there if you dig into some of the documentation about statecraft and government policy. But there's a national security triangle, and at each of the points of the triangle, there's a different element. There's power is one element, influence is another element, and security is the third element. As a CIA officer and as any national security professional, you're taught these three elements that create the national security triangle because you're taught and trained to put every decision through which of these three categories does your decision apply to? And it gives people a common language that they can use. So if I'm talking to you and you're at NSA and we're talking to somebody who's on the Hill and whatever else, we're using the same terminology. When I left CIA, I realized that same national security triangle applied to everyday life. Only the words weren't the same words that we use. We don't talk about power, influence, and security. What we talk about are wealth, health, and relationships. And each of those disciplines align to the national security triangle in everyday life, just like a hand in a glove. Because then when you start to break down all of the training and all of the education that CIA taught me about that national security triangle, it just fits under these different headings.
Wow.
So Everyday Spy was built the same way. So my company is really just a replica of CIA, built to serve the constituents, built to serve the average person, instead of being built to serve elite operators.
Do you find yourself, so obviously you've become adept in a number of these skills, both through your training and now through your teaching. Do you find yourself unconsciously using them? I mean, because again, these skills are psychological and relational. Do they just become embedded in your basic character, like day to day? And what has that experience been like?
Yeah, they do. They become part of who you are. Just like, guitar players and piano players and mathematicians. Like they learn how to do things without even thinking about them. So we certainly learn a number of skills. I wouldn't say necessarily on a subconscious level, but certainly on an unconscious level. You're not consciously aware that you're doing the thing until you turn your attention towards the fact that you're doing the thing that you're doing. And it's been an interesting journey. The real powerful part of it happened when I left CIA, and my wife left CIA with me, thank God, because she's my best friend in the world now. And part of that is not because we're like a perfect married couple, and it's not because we're best friends because we're like lifelong partners. Anybody who's been married longer than 3 years knows that marriage is a pain in the ass. But we are both former CIA officers that have been removed from CIA. So if we want to surround ourselves with anything like the people that we used to work with, and there are some amazing people at CIA, the only option we have is to work together. Right. So she's my outlet to continue to connect with that caliber of person, and I'm her connection to that caliber of person still. And when I say that caliber of person, what I mean is the level of investment, in a stronger United States, the level of intelligence and critical thinking skills and ability to kind of separate yourself from the hype, that's what we become for each other. And it's a lonely existence because you learn how to read when people are lying to you, when they're interested in you. You learn how to read when people are stressed or when they have anxiety, and you know how to fix it, and you want to help them fix it, but you also know that most people want to talk about fixing and never actually.
Right.
So then you're always asking yourself, like, who's worth the investment of my time and energy, because they're actually going to act on what I teach them.
But now you have this filtering mechanism, which is your business, right? Will people put skin in the game and actually invest in learning the skills that you have to offer?
Exactly right. And that's the thing that I love about business. Business is the opportunity for all of us to give what we have and meet the level of the investor who's coming back in.
Yeah.
The person who pays the most is showing the most investment in leveraging the skills they learn from you.
Yeah.
It's very easy to prioritize that person and invest back in them.
Yes.
And even as you're doing that, you're creating product, you're creating productivity, GDP that's improving the economy and continuing to make the America a stronger country, or the world a stronger world.
Well, and most fundamentally, because you're actually improving the individual market actors, right, at their basic psychological makeup or the tools they have to deal with the world. What's the old saying that there's no better place to invest than in yourself, because it pays the most dividends in everything that you do.
Right. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing. I mean, you don't have a podcast because you're trying to be selective in who you help. You have a podcast so that you can help as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And because you know that only a small percentage of all the people you reach are going to put skin in the game, learn a new skill, put themselves through the discomfort of learning and applying and growing. So you cast the widest net to give the most people the opportunity to grow.
Yes.
But they're the ones that have to act on it.
That and the groupies, which are nerdy middle-aged white guys mostly. Speaking of podcasts, you have a podcast.
I do.
Everyday Espionage?
Yeah, Everyday Espionage.
What do you guys talk about on there? Are you talking about the business and these tools, or what are the topics?
Yeah, so I have a unique kind of podcast, unique style. I boil down espionage lessons that apply to everyday life into short, like 9 to 20 minute segments. And it's just me. And I talk to a microphone as if you're going back to college or back to high school, or, if you're watching YouTube. And I just give people very practical guidance and instruct them in how to use one specific spy skill and apply it to everyday life in your health, wealth, or relationships triangle, right? So that my goal is that people listen to the podcast, and in 10 minutes, they learn something that they can then apply on the job to get ahead in the job. And then they jump back in the car and they listen to the next episode on their way back home, and they learn one thing in 10 minutes that allows them to, make a good impression with their wife or their husband, and maybe have a romantic night together, which, is not always something that happens after you've been married for a few years. So that's kind of the goal. The goal is just, how do I give people tactical tips that they can immediately leverage and use for an unfair advantage?
That is so cool. So spy school on the go.
Spy school on the go, in your ear. Yep.
That is so freaking cool. How long have you been doing that?
So I launched that in 2018. And I've been blessed to be on the iTunes top 100 multiple times. I've been in the top 10 multiple times. Yeah, I'm in the top 1% or the top 0.05% of podcasts in the world right now.
Wow. Congratulations.
Exciting. Thank you very much. I mean, you're right up there too. So
that's very cool. That's very cool. So the difference between what you're going to learn at Everyday Spy versus the podcast, you just go more in depth with your Everyday Spy students, or is there a lot of crossover?
Yeah, so it's a very similar model to what you see in a lot of digital learning. What I'm giving people in Everyday Espionage in my podcast is kind of a shotgun approach. Like, here's a little bit of everything. It's not connected. It doesn't grow like a lesson plan grows, because some days people will listen to one episode and they may not listen to another episode for 3 weeks. It's very much practical, tangible, use it right now kind of guidance. What I do with Everyday Spy is I then take those lessons, I contextualize them, I format them, and I deliver them in a way that people can actually grow in a logical fashion, right? So they can learn to master not just a skill, but a concept that applies to that skill.
Got it.
Right? So it's the difference between familiarity with the podcast and mastery with the course selection.
Got it.
And then as people master skills in my Everyday Spy world, they also then usually want to learn how to apply those skills in real life. So then we also have a series of live events where people get to do all the crazy spy shit that you alluded to in the beginning. We teach people how to drive cars offensively. We teach people how to shoot weapons. We teach people how to go in disguise. We teach people how to operate in the street and drop dead drops and give covert signals. I've actually got a course coming up in St. Petersburg, Florida in June, where we're teaching people all the street tradecraft.
That is so cool.
And then they'll learn it and we'll apply it to everyday life, right? Here's how a dead drop and what the skills are around a dead drop. Here's how they improve your personal security and your relationships with your boss, your wife, your kids.
That is so freaking cool. I guess I'm extra fanboying about this right now because I used to read the James Bond novels. I actually didn't read them. I did the audiobook. And man, they're just so good. Like even better than the movies. And the movies are really good. And so many of the things, like I don't know, I guess the author Ian Fleming actually did a lot of homework because it seemed like these were legit espionage tactics and tools and stories. And I just always was so fascinated with that. And it sounds like now you're delivering that to real people.
Yeah, it's still a big question mark whether Ian Fleming was actually a MI6 asset or not. And there's a lot of documentation out there suggests
because he ran in those circles, right?
And the same with Le Carre or Le Carre. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but another author who created a number of super famous spy fiction novels. You've got a lot of crossover in terms of spy fiction and spy entertainment, but that's entertainment only. It's not educational. What's been beneficial for me is I think that I am the first person to actually introduce spy education. And it explains why we've had awesome success and awesome growth and no competition, because my stuff isn't perfect. It's not perfect. It's not as good as it's going to be. It's very much brand new entrepreneur figuring things out.
Right.
But in a pool of one fish, right, you're the only option.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned disguises. Is there any hope for a Neanderthal like me getting into disguise?
Oh yeah, man. We could change your look today. It's all about disguise. Is really all about taking the things that are the most immediately noticeable about you and dampening them.
Oh, okay.
Right. So what we're all taught to do socially is accentuate the things that make us special, right? Accentuate those big arms that you have, accentuate the strong jaw.
Looser shirts.
Baggy square shirts, jackets, right? Cover up the hair with a beanie or with a sock hat, break up your eyes with some glasses, right? Convince you to not shave for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe even shave a goatee, gray the goatee a little bit, right? You're not going to look like Robert Breedlove anymore.
Yeah.
You still might look like a large male,
yeah,
but you're not going to look like Robert Breedlove.
I remember. I think this was in the James Bond book Moonraker. I could be wrong about this, but there was one point where the villain had all his operatives completely shave their head and grow large mustaches, and for whatever reason, that like totally made them indistinguishable. It was like it's very hard to identify someone that's completely shaved their head and grown a large mustache.
It's at least difficult to distinguish them from each other.
Yes, yeah, which was kind of the point. I think they were all supposed to be henchmen or whatever. Okay, so you're also known for being a brilliant geopolitical thinker. You've got a lot of very interesting opinions on the world, where we're at, how we got to here. So I'm hoping today we can jump down some of these rabbit holes, and these are topics that we inescapably land on. Going into the Bitcoin rabbit hole is like, well, what happens next? What happens when you separate money from state? How does the nation state respond? What does human socioeconomic organization look like after Bitcoin? Because it takes away a lot of the revenue streams for the nation state, like taxation and inflation. So trying to get a handle on where we are today, I think, is just one recurrent theme we keep coming back to. So for instance, China today, very big topic in a lot of people's minds. I guess we would say they are the burgeoning world superpower, perhaps the second place world superpower, something like that. From a monetary standpoint, I know they've been the biggest producer and importer of gold for the past like 7 to 10 years. So they might be making a move to become the global reserve currency, something like that. What are your views on China, and particularly as they relate to Taiwan? Is this And maybe you could explain kind of the strategic importance of Taiwan, and how do you see China today, and how does Taiwan play into that mix?
Yeah, I mean, this is a super relevant geopolitical question, and it's one that I'm hoping we're going to go back and forth on, because otherwise it could very quickly turn into like a one-sided lecture about China, right? But first I want to define what China is, right? So for the purposes of whatever discussion you and I have, I want to make sure that we start by defining it as the second largest economy in the world based on GDP, and like without disagreement. Doesn't matter if you're red or if you're blue or if you're, African or if you're Latino, everybody agrees China is the second largest economy in the world. Everybody also agrees that China's economic growth rate far exceeds that of the United States. Japan was the second largest economy up until about 4 years ago, right? So China has already grown and surpassed the second largest economy to become the second largest economy. So that's for sure what they are when we talk about them. They are also the country that is growing at a rate where their growth to spending ratio, specifically in military development, technology development, their growth to spending is the highest ratio anywhere else, because nobody's growing as quickly as China. So even though they may spend more, the amount of growth compared to the amount of spending is less. So that's where the threat, when we talk about the threat of China, comes from. And inside the world of intelligence, we refer to China as a global power competitor, a GPC country, or a near peer threat. Those are the two monikers that, whether you're talking to a general or whether you're talking to a politician, they will understand those terms. Global power competitor or near peer threat. In both of those senses, everybody outside, everybody in Washington, D.C., everybody in the DOD, all view China through the lens of threat. Because what is a competitor? A threat. And of course, a threat is a threat. And both terminologies include that moniker. Now, what are they threatening? They're not threatening your life or my life. They're not threatening the well-being of our families. They're threatening the current order of power. Because the United States, being the largest economy, is the world's superpower. Whoever takes that top productive economic role becomes the world's next superpower. So what is the United States when we're not the world superpower anymore? No one's really asking that question. And that's the real concern about China. That's the concern that we all really have, is what happens if China becomes the top dog?
Yeah.
And we are not, especially when you consider China doesn't work, it doesn't have a negative debt to import to output ratio, export to import ratio.
It's a net exporter.
Right, exactly. It's a net profitable country. We are actually this week in a crisis about expanding our debt ceiling and defaulting on our own debt.
Right.
Because we have to extend our debt acceptance. We're already 117% leveraged as a country. That's going to kill most households for sure. Right. So China doesn't have that problem. So it's really hard for us to see what's the future going to be. So I just wanted to start there by defining what they are and how the U.S. government and national security infrastructure see them.
Yeah, and most of the U.S., I don't know if it's most of, but a large percentage of the U.S. debt outstanding is held by China and Japan and several other creditor countries. So where does Taiwan play into this? Taiwan has, I guess, some geographic strategic significance, and there's been some struggle over who controls Taiwan for some time. What's going on in Taiwan currently, and then what is the strategic significance of it? Yeah,
so and you're dovetailing perfectly, right? So when we talk about the global competition between the United States and China, you have this question of Taiwan. Taiwan is not a strategic location. There's nothing strategic about the location of the island off the coast of China in the South China Seas. There's nothing strategic there. It goes back to when Mao Zedong and the Communist Party took over China in 1949. When that happened, the Chiang Kai-shek government that was in charge of China was a nationalist government that was pro-Western. So in that civil war, where the communists took power of the country that was nationalistically held, they ran that government off mainland China and they expelled them to Taiwan. So the government of China that helped us in World War II, the government of China that leans pro-West, the democracy the closest thing to democracy that has ever lived on Chinese mainland is now on Taiwan. And part of our World War II commitments were, hey, we promise to support and defend the democracy that is burgeoning on Taiwan. And China could not take Taiwan in 1949. They couldn't get across. It was a communist party. It was a takeover. They couldn't get across the 70-mile strait. So there was space there. And then that turned into, 70 years of this awkward policy where the United States officially doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country. We officially recognize that China and Taiwan are one China that operates under two systems, right? And that's our official stance. Very, very few countries in the world actually recognize Taiwan as a country. And that's where things get sticky, because the relationship between the United States and Taiwan for those 70 years was so strong that we were able to use our economic gravitas to fund the development of Taiwan. So while China was still kind of cobbling stones together after their revolution, Taiwan got the benefit of being connected to the West. If you recall, the same thing happened in Japan. We dropped 2 nuclear weapons in Japan, eviscerated their entire previous political structure. The reason Japan grew back so quickly was because America invested, and America basically took the lead in rebuilding Japan. We did the same thing in Taiwan. Now, Taiwan, where they're strategically meaningful, is that they are the world's #1 manufacturer of semiconductors. Something to the tune of 95% of all semiconductor manufacturing happens in Taiwan.
Wow.
Now, the vast because when we invested in their development, what we invested in was manufacturing of high-tech development.
Okay.
We didn't want to create manufacturing jobs here in the United States,
right,
because manufacturing jobs are low margin, et cetera, et cetera. So we taught the Taiwanese to do it. And then we just had this agreement where, hey, we will develop and create the chips. We'll engineer the chips. We'll send you the designs. You manufacture the chips. And then you get to do that for everybody. So then the Chinese did that. The Europeans did that. They create semiconductors for everybody in the world.
And so this has become a point of vulnerability for the U.S. to have all that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now what you have is China has set under Xi Jinping a plan to be, by 2025, the world's largest high-tech exporter. The only way they hit that goal is if they absorb Taiwan's exporting capabilities of high-tech semiconductors. Otherwise, they miss that 2025 goal. And the United States and Europe depend on semiconductors from Taiwan to not just fuel our weapons, but to fuel our healthcare devices, our microwaves, the technology that we use for school students. Like, everything relies on semiconductors. AI. I don't know whether or not you know this or not, maybe you do. The AI that is revolutionizing the world right now, the vast majority of those chips are actually created by a company called NVIDIA. NVIDIA is a legacy video game company. So AI is fueled on the back of NVIDIA. NVIDIA creates chips by engineering them only. Guess who manufactures every one of those AI chips?
Taiwan.
So whoever takes Taiwan has the market cornered in terms of technology advancements, weapons manufacturing, healthcare devices, and they control the supply chain for everybody else.
And so this is a creature of the U.S.'s creation, right? That we basically pushed, or we engineered this economy to be a semiconductor-focused economy. Now it's become a point of vulnerability because it's a single point of failure for us. What is the U.S. competitive response to that?
So what you've seen, that's where you hear about the CHIP Act, the Biden administration, the Biden CHIP Act, the chip wars, if you've heard that term. Over the last year, the current administration has created multiple incentives and deterrents for chip development, chip engineering to be shared with China. So they still want their chips to be manufactured in Taiwan, but they want to make sure that none of the Western partners are sharing the technology itself with China. So they're trying to block China out of understanding and getting access to modern day chips. They're also trying to create a domestic manufacturing base for semiconductors, but that's going to be a 5 to 7 year project. And one of the core ways that they're trying to get that manufacturing base in the US is they're trying to give TSMC, the company in Taiwan, they're trying to give them a home base here in the United States, so that the entire TSMC capability has a second location, right, on domestic land inside the United States. That's the response that we're seeing diplomatically and commercially. The response that you're seeing militarily is all that you're reading about in the newspaper, right? All the passing of American ships through the Straits of Taiwan,
Right.
all the visits of heads of state to Taiwan and the challenge and the counter response from China and Chinese exercises off the coast of Taiwan. That's all demonstrating like this clashing of swords,
Yeah.
saber rattling to say Taiwan is ours. It's what the United States is saying. The United States is not saying Taiwan is free. They're saying Taiwan is ours.
Right.
And China is saying, no, Taiwan is ours.
Uh,
And when you look at Taiwan as an independent nation itself, it's a fascinating case study because they have a standing army that is not professionalized.
yeah.
The Taiwanese themselves don't know how to fight. They don't really want to fight. When you do your mandatory military service there, it's a 6-month stint, right? It's not at all a professional army. It's not at all a force that's ready to defend itself. It's not a force that wants to defend itself. It's actually culturally a negative stigma to be in the military.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be a business person or an entrepreneur or in a big company. That's how you show your success culturally in Taiwan.
Okay, so I imagine, I'm just speculating here without too much knowledge on this, when the semiconductor focus of the Taiwanese economy was established by the U.S. or imposed by the U.S., semiconductors were probably much less relevant in the grand scheme of the global economy, right? Because we weren't into the digital age at that point. But now semiconductors are in everything, right? Everything that we do in life is mediated by some electronic device, the vast majority of which use semiconductors to some capacity. Is that part of this rising tension between China and the U.S.? Is like the whole global economy is just shifting towards digital technology or semiconductor facilitated technology, and now Taiwan, which may have not been as big of a deal in the past, has now become kind of a flashpoint?
So yes, the short answer is yes. And the more nuanced answer is going back to Obama in 2010, Obama announced what was then known as an Asia pivot. The United States was very focused on a global war on terrorism, the GWAT, Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait. We had been dominated by 20 years of fighting terrorism. The Chinese were not fighting terrorists. The Chinese were expanding their sphere of influence in Southeast Asia, winning friends in the Philippines, winning friends in Malaysia, winning friends in Vietnam, Cambodia, or trying to use Soviet-era tactics to gain influence in those countries, right? Because remember, the Soviets were the ones that taught the Chinese how to be communists.
Right.
So you're seeing a lot of that legacy Russian habit in the way China executes its geopolitical influence. So when the United States finally woke up to say, oh, like we won World War II because we were able to cross the Pacific. Now we're losing our sphere of influence in the South Pacific and China's growing. All the conflict about the South China Seas, I'm sure you remember reading about that, right? The growing threat to China, the growing threat from China. And then you started, more of our Five Eyes partners started to report on very aggressive Chinese intelligence efforts, primarily through, college universities, through institutes that were located in targeting students. So as that came to be, it became a more prevalent, more obvious threat. So Obama shifted and started funding efforts to pivot our resources back towards Asia. How do we support ourselves in Asia? So the reason we have the conflict we have is really over the strategic power of the South Pacific. Taiwan being in the South Pacific and also now having this relevance as a semiconductor manufacturing hub. In 2023, 13 years after the pivot was announced, all that does is exacerbate the need and exacerbate the timeline. You got other layers, layers upon layers that are going on too. The war in Ukraine, the political divide in the United States, the rise of Xi Jinping.
Yes.
Right. 13 years ago, he was just, I think, a 2-term Chinese minister. Now he's been in power for 20 years.
Just lifetime dictator, right? Yeah.
Authoritarian.
Yeah. Wow. Are we going to see semiconductor manufacturing diversify out of Taiwan as a result of this?
That's the one thing I haven't heard anybody talk about. Outside of the United States creating a domestic capability, I have not heard about Europe talking about creating a domestic capability. I've not heard about any of the competitors in Southeast Asia trying to create that capability. It really is an interesting thing. And I think it's because the world, like if I was a politician in Cambodia or Vietnam, it's one thing to be the the other person who creates shoes,
Yeah.
or the other person who creates trinkets.
Yeah.
But if you become the person if you become the country that creates semiconductors, that's just putting a giant target on your country, especially if you're right next door to China.
Gotcha.
Right? So it's better to just say, ooh, it's somebody else's problem.
Okay.
We're going to buy our healthcare equipment from China.
Yeah.
We're going to keep everything peaceful, right? That's what it boils down to, is the two leading economic superpowers, the near-peer competitors.
Yes.
They absolutely need to control the future
They
manufacturing.
have a huge appetite for semiconductors. Wow, that makes a ton of sense.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, the Gold Investment Letter. The Gold Investment Letter helps sophisticated investors navigate capital markets and maximize their profits in trading gold, silver, and mining stocks. The Gold Investment Letter seeks out the most undervalued companies and identifies special situations in the mining sector, and then provides in-depth analysis on both their financial positions and future prospects. The Gold Investment Letter explores many complex domains, such as investor psychology, portfolio management, and macroeconomic trends, all with the goal of making you a better investor. The Gold Investment Letter offers a free version and a paid premium version, and I strongly recommend you at least sign up for the free version, because after having read a few of these issues, I can promise you it is a treasure trove of good information. You can sign up for the free newsletter today at goldinvestmentletter.com. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, iCoin Technology. iCoin has just released a sleek new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone, a little touch screen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, no GPS. It's a strictly physically cold hardware wallet. Like I said, it's got a high-res 3-inch touch screen. It's got a camera for air gapping the wallet. It's got optional Bluetooth compatibility. And it's really a brand new UI, UX experience for a hardware wallet, making it very accessible, easy to use, not intimidating. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like iCoin Wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. Go to iCointechnology.com today and use promo code Bitcoin23 for 30% off of this new sleek hardware wallet. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to legacy health insurance. Now let's face it, legacy health insurance is an absolute scam. Nobody can explain this better than the legendary comedian Chris Rock.
This is insurance. You got to have some insurance. You got to. There's an insurance. They shouldn't even call it insurance. They should just call it in case shit. Like, I give a company some money in case shit happens. Now, if shit don't happen, shouldn't I get my money back?
So with CrowdHealth, instead of just paying premiums that you'll never see again, you can hold part of this pool of savings in dollars and in Bitcoin through CrowdHealth. And when you have a health event, you can draw against this pool of communal savings. So go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove to learn more or sign up.
The concentration of semiconductor manufacturing in Taiwan seems to be a problem. Is this a potential catalyst for an armed conflict between China and the United States?
I think that's the question that everybody's really asking themselves when it comes to what does a future conflict between these two near-peer competitors really look like? When you consider war as a topic itself, wars are not fought over ideals.
Mm-hmm.
They never really have been. They've always been fought over economics, right? When you look at the Gulf War was a war catalyzed because of oil, right? I mean, even if you go all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars were a response to boycotts from the UK that were preventing goods from getting to Napoleon and France, right?
Right.
So wars, the thing that makes it worth it to spend all that money and spend all those lives is economies.
100%.
And that's what we're seeing right now, even with Ukraine and Russia.
Yes.
Right? It's not a war of ideals. It's not a war for this is the future of democracy. Those are all things that we're told.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a war because Russia knows
Yes.
its future economic livelihood is tied to Ukraine, and it cannot let that go.
Yeah, no, that's a great framing. I'm reminded of the Bastiat quote, "If goods don't cross borders, soldiers will." And as I often say on this show, I say money is the means and ends of all warfare. Money sort of interpreted broadly, because obviously it's resources, right? It could be land, oil, productive capacity, whatever it may be. But the point is, you're only going to engage in the most expensive enterprise in human history, which is military combat, if there is some prospect of economic gain. Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it, right? It's not a profitable business. You wouldn't engage in it. And this also plays into where we think Bitcoin is such a radical phenomenon, because it makes those resources harder to steal. If people have recourse to put wealth in something like Bitcoin, very hard to confiscate that forcibly. Mm-hmm. So presumably that's, in the long run, there's a disincentive to armed conflict. Okay. Sorry, sidebar.
Well, I think that those are all great points, right? I think it's a great point that decentralized banking, decentralized money,
yes,
begins to kind of tip the scales against the benefits or the incentives for militarized conflict.
Yes.
And you're exactly right. Military conquest is the most expensive endeavor out there. Mm-hmm. And no one's going to invest in that without the intention of having a higher return on investment.
Yes.
Inside the world of war theory, there's multiple types of wars in war theory, but the two that I want to mention here are there's interstate war and there's intrastate war. Mm. Interstate war is what we're seeing right now between Russia and Ukraine. Mm-hmm. It's what we saw when America invaded Afghanistan. It's what we saw in the Gulf War. It's what we saw in World War II. When two standalone states, sovereign nations, when they're in conflict with each other or one invades the other, that's called interstate conflict. Mm-hmm. It is extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. It's logistics, like moving troops, moving equipment, moving weapons from one place to another. It's expensive in lives. It's expensive in terms of the opportunity cost, because when you mobilize troops and weapons to go somewhere else, you're losing productivity in other endeavors.
Right.
So it's a very expensive maneuver if you're going to pursue interstate war. Mm-hmm. So what the world discovered circa 2011 with Syria is that intra-state war, or a war inside of one state between two factions of the state, that really started in Syria. And interestingly enough, guess what war was just recently announced as over this week? Syria. And guess who won? Bashar al-Assad, right? The dictator that the whole world was working against. So it's really interesting when you compare what is announced about Syria this week, right? Syria was just welcomed back into the Arab League.
Yeah.
Like all the Arab nations that used to fight against Syria and fund the opposition to the Assad regime, all of those Arab parties are now inviting the president of Syria to come back to the fold, right? So all of those sanctions, all of the death, all of the warring promises. If you remember, Assad was the one that used chemical weapons against the rebellion, and in the famous Red Line incident that Obama never actually took action on, right? So this has been a huge, interesting piece, 12 years of history, to see how dictatorship and authoritarianism can win, no matter what we say. And that sort of victory is what really fuels Putin and Xi Jinping to say, maybe America doesn't have it all figured out. Maybe they really are just making propaganda of their own that democracy is the best thing in the world, because Syria is still standing in the hands of Assad.
Yeah.
And they said that would never happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it seems like for all the advantages of decentralization, free market economies, you get a lot more wealth creation, productivity, as we've touched on. There does seem to be this drawback, which is you're not as strong militarily, perhaps, as a super centralized police state, I guess, for lack of a better term, that can just move more with less effort, right? Whereas we suffer a lot of democratic gridlock here in the U.S., an authoritarian China can just move on a dime, right? It's like whatever
Xi Jinping said.
Xi Jinping, thank you. Can't think of his name. Whatever he says goes, right? So everyone just kind of follows suit. Yeah, that's a tough one, right? How do we deal with that problem?
Well, my theory is that's where you're seeing the rise in discussion about central bank digital currencies, right? What are they? CBDC?
CBDCs, yeah.
You're seeing this as a workable solution, because blockchain technology, without a doubt, is superior technology. Nobody argues that. Nobody in the health sector, the educational sector, the financial sector, everybody agrees blockchain technology is a massive evolution in terms of technology. It's also a technology that plays well with AI, right? The two make each other more secure. So the world's not trying to necessarily work against blockchain. But when you have decentralized banking, currencies like Bitcoin, those currencies have two fundamental problems. The first fundamental problem is that the early adopters are oftentimes illicit users because they're trying to use money that's not on the market. That's why you saw so much of it being used in human trafficking and so much of it being used in drugs. And even now you're seeing digital currencies being used in fentanyl trafficking, right? And whether a big part of that is a narrative around those currencies, but there are actual use cases that demonstrate that there is accuracy to that narrative. The second big thing that goes against them is that there's no way, like you were saying, to create domestic productivity around a currency that's not being tracked or managed by the state. So if they can't draw taxes out of it, if they can't draw profit out of it, then the state doesn't really want to support it. And policymakers don't want to support it. And the people who decide what can and can't be adopted at scale are the policymakers of the nation states themselves. So their way around that has been the development of
CBDC.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the headline example is China, who last year outlawed and made all digital currencies, all cryptocurrencies illegal while they developed their own internal CBDCs.
Of course.
And now they're making them mandatory, right?
Yeah.
Now people are getting paid. Sovereign state workers are being paid now in digital currency issued by the state of China.
Yeah. And it's also instrumental or even indispensable to social engineering programs like the Chinese social credit score system. You have to be able to selectively control people's money, turn it off, etc., to socially engineer them into the outcomes that the state desires. Yeah, forcing behaviors. With the Bitcoin thing, and its illicit use cases, I think the whole argument is just completely bunk because a tool is amoral, right? Meaning it doesn't have a morality, right? You can use a hammer to do something productive like build a house, or you can use a hammer to do something destructive like bash a skull. To try and assign moral culpability to Bitcoin, it's like, oh, well, sex traffickers or drug dealers use it. Well, they also use a lot of US dollars.
Yep, they use cash, exactly.
The vast majority of every criminal transaction that's ever been conducted in the past 100 years has been conducted in US dollars. Yet you don't see anyone demonizing the US dollar about that, right? It's to try and blame the tool, I think, is just a failure of rationality. And to the other point that you can't easily tax Bitcoin. You can't obviously manage it or govern it or regulate it at all. That is a feature, not a bug, as far as I'm concerned. Now, the state doesn't like it,
correct,
because the state can't unilaterally extract wealth through it. However, we have to consider that everything the state is extracting is theft, right? So you're extracting these resources from productive market actors. To the extent that you stop extracting from them, you stop stealing from them, you're actually increasing the incentives for market actors to be productive. So I think it's a major net benefit for humanity in terms of innovation, productivity, et cetera. And the last caveat I would say is just on blockchain technology. This is something you'll hear in the Bitcoin community. It's a farce. Bitcoin is the only blockchain technology. Everything else is either a gambling device or a scam, basically. Now, maybe we're overly generalizing, but I think if you study the past 14 years of market history in and around Bitcoin and crypto, the thesis has largely been proven. So it's interesting, though, because you have this tool in Bitcoin that's the ultimate enemy of the state, yet it's the ultimate enemy of the state precisely because it's the ultimate benefit to the individual.
Right. It goes back to our conversation about equality, right? Guess what the state does not want?
Right.
The state does not want
fairness.
The individual to be at the same level of power as the state.
Yes.
Right? They want sovereignty over right, the people. They want you to be distracted. They want you to be working. They want you to be engaged in domestic matters while they're engaged in larger matters. And they do. They want to extract your wealth as the price, right, as the currency of their efficiency. There's an awesome triangle. Again, I'm a big fan of triangles. There's this awesome social triangle that talks about the evolution of society. And if you've heard this before, just tell me to shut up. On the bottom of this triangle is tribalism. I'm sorry, on the bottom of this triangle is individualism, right? When you and I were cavemen, you eat what you hunt, I eat what I hunt.
Right.
If you don't hunt, you go hungry. If I don't shut the cave with a giant rock, a bear eats me, right? That's how it worked. You do you, I do me, game over. We evolved and organized ourselves into the next tier up the triangle, which was tribes, right? Tribalism. Now it's like, hey, I'm pretty good at climbing trees and grabbing coconuts. You're really good at hunting deer. Let's work together, become a tribe, and I'll grab your coconuts and you hunt my deer and we'll trade. But the guy across the street, like the people that live across the lake, fuck them. We'll go kill them, and then we'll take their women, hunt their deer, and eat their coconut.
Yeah.
Right? It was tribe against tribe.
Yeah.
Well, the next tier above tribalism is called the state.
Yeah.
When you move from individualism to tribalism, you gain some efficiency. I don't have to learn to hunt deer. You don't have to learn to climb trees. But we lose some freedom because now I'm depending on you. I have to ask you for meat. You have to ask me for vegetables and fruit, right? So we lose some freedom. Well, guess what happens when you move from tribalism to state? You lose more freedom. Because what the state has to offer you is they can centralize and create scales of efficiency around policing, protection, education for the future, right? Social welfare systems to protect you when you're old and to take care of the sick and the needy. So the state is bringing value to the community, and that's how they do it. But then inside that state triangle, there's another triangle where you have different levels of state actors, right? That go from decentralized states to authoritarian states. But this social construct means that as you go up this social ladder, you increase efficiency, but you lose individual freedom.
Interesting.
Right? So the state knows that they're the ones that came up with the theory. They understand that. So their job is to keep people satisfied.
Yeah.
Right? Let them eat bread. Or let them eat cake. I think that was what the queen said.
What do they say in, I think it was ancient Rome, bread and circuses, right?
Bread and circuses.
Yeah.
Right? Let them deal with that and then keep them out of the larger matters.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. That cryptocurrency, Bitcoin is as the leading example, takes that away.
It's a threat. Yeah.
It makes it so that individuals now don't have to rely on the efficiencies of the state.
Is it hyperbole to say that the state is kind of like a modern slavery complex and that it's using these different mechanisms to control the lives of people and enrich itself?
I wouldn't say that's straight up hyperbole, because when you look at other democracies around the world, most notoriously, if you look at the United Arab Emirates, they're a democracy and a close ally to the United States. They are a perfect example of modern day slavery, right? They bring in foreign workers and they hold them to contracts. They take their passports and they force them to work for low wages, right? Because they have a system that has allowed that to happen. And of course, we support that system because we get oil from the UAE.
We benefit.
Yeah. Right? So you're not necessarily wrong that it's a modern construct of slavery. But I think the big difference between the slavery that we're all so familiar with when we talk about slavery and current slavery is that slaves of the past were taken.
Yes.
Were taken away from one point of freedom and then forced into a world of forced labor. Whereas for us, we're born into this system that's already forced labor.
Right.
Right. And you do have the opportunity to break free.
Yes.
But that's not an equal opportunity.
Yeah, I would say that we've definitely progressed in that sense, that in the past, as I understand it, ancient slavery, like if you're born a slave in ancient Egypt building a pyramid, there's no social mobility. Like that's what you do until you die. Today, there does seem to be the possibility of social mobility through, changing jurisdictions or becoming an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera. Not a lot, like it's still rare, right? If you are a wage slave or domestic slave, that you can get stuck in that situation. But there's at least some opportunity or some option to escape it, whereas in the past, there seemed to be none at all. But it does seem to be a useful framing where it's not to say good guys, bad guys. It's like when you look at human history, we've been enslaving each other forever.
Yeah.
Like it's like probably the defining feature of human history is war and slavery. And so why would we think that today we've somehow thrown off the yoke of that? I mean, we're still living in it. It's just a different different format or a different implementation of it, perhaps.
I feel like the conversation itself that we see splashed across headlines is another version of bread and circus, right? Let's all focus on the slavery of the past. Let's still argue about that slavery instead of have the conversation
Talking about the tax
modern
bills.
slavery. Yeah. Let's find a way to get people fighting for, you know, remuneration or
Reparations.
Yeah, reparations about something that happened, you know, in the past, because that's going to satisfy them today.
Yes.
And then 10 years from now, we'll have them focused on the outrage that they have from today.
Yes.
Right. And they do that to all of us. It's a common thread, because you always want to, there's a specific demographic that you want to distract. And that demographic is the highest income earning, most productive demographic. What is that demographic? Your 35 to 50-year-old career, educated, productive professional, right? Male or female.
Right.
And the nice thing is, in those age frames from 35 to 50, guess what we're doing to ourselves? Having kids, building businesses, getting married. Those are massive distractions in your life that keep you away from caring about current events, or keep you out of politics, or keep you away from the voting polls. So when they add on top of that, you know, news stories and headlines and social issues that just infuriate you, but you can't do anything about them, it just continues to aggravate. It's a strategy that we call at CIA. It's a strategy that we use in covert influence campaigns. You are influencing a body of people to create almost like user-generated content that feeds into a cycle of distracting them further.
Yes. Wow. So interesting. We had a lot of interesting discussions in Miami, and one of the, you know, we're always trying to get to the bottom of things. And so every now and then, it seems like we stumble across an answer that really makes a lot of sense in framing the bigger picture. And one of these perspectives was reached recently, and I just want to share it with you and get your feedback, that human history seems to be one psyop after another intended to justify the stealing of your stuff, basically. So for instance, you had Marxism, which was from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, right? This very utopian brotherhood sounding ideal that of course led to its precise opposite, which was a state with absolute power, you know, stealing from everyone, starvation, hundreds of millions murdered, et cetera, et cetera. Another way I've heard this put, I think, was by Eric Weinstein. He said, the idealism of every age is the cover story for its greatest theft. So today, one of the idealisms that's floating currently in the world is climate change, right? The unlimited climate change blank check to just print any amount of money. I think what I saw the estimates were like they wanted to print $100 trillion, which is to double the global money supply over the next 50 years to fight climate change. And so again, you have this idealism of, oh, there's this infinite boogeyman called the weather, and we're just going to need to steal more from you to fix the weather. What's wrong with people? Why do we keep fabricating these giant convoluted narratives in an attempt to justify our stealing of other people's shit? Like, can we just stop the lying and the stealing? Like, is there a way out of this, or is this just a human condition situation?
So I think your question is right on target, right? It is a human condition, and the human condition is that humans have been empirically shown to overvalue losses and undervalue gains.
Yes.
So because of that, we're always focusing the majority of our energy and our attention towards the future loss that awaits us. And we're not crediting ourselves the current gains that we have. So when you create this culture that's always worried about what they don't have, or worried about what they have that they will lose, they never start to think of what's happening right now, right? A big part of the reason we even have a mindfulness, self-care culture that exists at all is because people started waking up about 15 years ago to this idea that we're all future focused. We're future focused or past focused, but not present focused. That's a human condition because our society has evolved faster than we have biologically evolved. So you and I are still very close to the cavemen that are, that 12 generations ago we were, right? Where they were just worried about, how am I going to eat today? How am I going to stay warm tonight? How are we going to stay dry tomorrow? Biologically, we're still very close to that person.
Yes.
Socially, we've evolved way past that. So how do we live in a world where we are still wired to worry about survive and not even think about how do we thrive?
Yes.
Right? And that's what really makes the people who can switch from survive to thrive faster are the people who succeed more. The people who are trapped in that survival mindset are the people who are delayed for longer. So you're right. The ideological overlay that allows thrive-based people to come in and essentially take advantage of survive-based people, that is also human nature.
Yeah.
Because everybody who's taking is worried about, what if I don't get enough? What about my future? What if it's not taken care of? So they see their target as the uninitiated.
Yeah.
We call them trained and untrained at CIA. There are trained people and there are untrained people. So when we operate, guess who we operate against? Untrained people.
Yeah.
Because to go up head to head against the trained person, just think about if you're
ROI.
Yeah, what's the ROI?
Yeah.
You're not going to try to mug some dude who you know is a jiu-jitsu fighter. You're going to try to mug some dude whose face is buried in his phone, who's probably looks like he's never been to a gym in his life.
Right.
It's just it's a matter of survival, but it's also a matter of ROI.
Yes.
Right? So if somebody's going to let themselves be stolen from, there's always going to be somebody who steals from them.
That's right. Wow. Yeah, it's kind of a bleak thing, right? It's like if human beings are just economically opportunistic, and if there's a someone in a position of power and someone in a position of weakness, the powerful tends to prey on the weak.
Why do we jump on a sale at a grocery store?
Yeah. Right.
Why do we jump on a discount?
Right.
Because we see that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
And in that opportunity, what we subconsciously realize is we have a chance to gain unfairly. And we don't even think about the fact that the organization that's losing it is losing profit or margin or whatever else, right? They've got a sale. That's my opportunity. We don't think about the fact that that's their loss of potential profit margin.
Yeah. Man, it is a very pernicious problem, because to get people to shift from the survive mindset into the thrive mindset often necessitates like some stable, peaceful conditions, right? The private property, for instance, like if you can't keep what you earn, how can you ever get out of survive and into thrive mindset?
Right.
So it's not just a matter of people doing inner cognitive work. It's also people responding to the conditions of their environment.
Right.
And so it's pernicious in the sense that you can't get people to stop preying on people. The people that are getting preyed on are kind of suppressed into that survive mindset, never allowed to enter the thrive mindset.
Even if they're the ones suppressing themselves.
Yeah.
I would also say, though, and again, this is the dickhead side of me coming out, I kind of like it the way it is. Because you know what would happen if everybody thrived? It would be a lot harder for me to thrive. So I like when people choose willful ignorance. I like when people choose to be lazy. I like when people choose not to try. It's better for me. Right? Does that mean that I'm preying on others? I don't really care. Right? Like, I'm here to create an opportunity set for myself and my family. I'm not going to lose the opportunity for that opportunity set by helping some stranger across the street just because somebody told me I have a moral obligation to do so.
Right.
If anything, it motivates me to work harder, produce something that's even higher quality, something that's even better, right? Be even more ethically upstanding, be even more engaged in politics, be even more engaged in social justice, because I want to shape it. And if there's 5,000 people out there that don't want to participate, that's cool. They can fund the thing that I'm shaping.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like in a very Darwinian,
dark kind of way.
Well, it's not dark though. And I think Darwinism is what it is. And like, we have to accept it and operate within its purview. But I also have the inner idealist, which is like, well, can we do better? Right? We're not just animals. Like, we're part animal and part rational, human, civilized, divine, whatever you want to call it. And I wonder if it is just economics at the end of the day, that by making the weak more difficult to prey upon, right? Again, I'm thinking about Bitcoin. It's like, if you have weak people holding their savings in Bitcoin, that just makes them harder to prey up. You can't inflate it. You can't tax it. They can move it easily. They can conceal it easily. Does that change this recurrent human dynamic to just constantly have the powerful preying on the weak? Because what that does is, in each of us following our own relative interests, we're actually shortchanging our absolute potential.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we did have a world where everyone thrived, so to speak, I mean, obviously this is a generalization, we would all be better off,
Right.
Because everyone would be doing what they want to do. You know, their passion would be aligned with their profession, so that everything that we enjoyed would be from the guy that was passionate about making chairs and passionate about making shoes and socks. So we'd get this increase in the variety and quality of goods and services that would benefit everyone. But we cannot realize that future if we keep just preying upon one another over and over and over again. So, but maybe there's a technological solution in things like Bitcoin to push us out of that dynamic.
For sure, I think that what Bitcoin does is it changes the spectrum of of what defines weak people, right? Because you got to remember, we talk about the powerful and the weak as if it's a dichotomy.
Sure.
It's not.
It's a continuum.
It's a continuum. There's a middle point, at which point you are more strong than you are weak, or more weak than you are strong. But there's still a continuum. So the individual who has their money secured in a fund that nobody else can touch but them because it's in a wallet with Bitcoin, that is not the same level of weakness as a person who is 100% tied to an employer who puts money into their, PNC bank account or their Capital One bank account.
That can be frozen at the touch of a button.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So even though both people may have the same level of education, the same level of income, the same level of, world trauma or life trauma, they might be equal in all other ways. But just by having your money outside of the reach of the federal government, you are not as weak as the other person.
Right.
Right. And then on the other side of the spectrum, on the powerful side of the spectrum, I have multiple ultra high net worth clients. Guess what? They're all invested in Bitcoin. Every one of them. Now, some of them invest more because they believe in the technology. Some of them invest less because they are completely unfamiliar with the technology, but they still want to have the opportunity to see it grow.
Yes.
But like when it comes to wealthy people, the metrics on Bitcoin are astounding when it comes to the concentration of total Bitcoins owned by wealth and income bracket, right? Because so much is owned by wealthy people. And the amount that's owned by your average person, right, is a different saturation level in terms of quantity of Bitcoins versus percentage of total buyers. And I think that really speaks to the buying power of the wealthy. Yeah. They know they can buy in large amounts. That's why we call them market movers.
Yeah.
They can change the entire direction of a market.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating when you see how that technology has been adapted or how it's been adopted by people who are already traditionally seen as strong versus weak.
Right.
The strong lean into it, take the risk and invest in it. And guess who the future strong, the future powerful will be today's weak who adopt the same methodology.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, that even in Bitcoin with all of its, let's say, beneficial aspects for human beings, right? Like giving us greater freedom, autonomy, etc. There's still a Darwinian process playing out. Like whoever can get it is going to get it, and the people that get it first are going to have the most in the long run. Yeah, you're definitely seeing that play out. But if anything, there's a lot of people want to wage a moral argument against that and say, well, that's a problem. And it's like, well, the way I try to say it is like, look, the train is moving.
Yeah.
You can argue about the train and complain about the train.
Stand in front of the train.
And you can do whatever you want. You can moralize it, but it's moving.
Yeah.
And it's like you either get on or you get off, or if you try to stand in front of it, you're going to get run over. It's like the moralizing doesn't do anything.
Right.
Like you can say it's not fair, Bitcoin's distribution is not fair. Well, neither is the US dollar distribution, neither is the gold distribution, neither is anything. Like nothing's fair ultimately, but in Bitcoin, we at least have something close to that ideal of a level playing field, because it's rules that no one can change or bend or break. And that's something humans have never had before. So it seems really useful.
And everybody has the choice.
Yeah.
You have the choice to get on the train, watch the train, stand behind the train, right? You have the choice.
Yeah.
I think what's really something that we cannot refute is that the rise and evolution of Bitcoin over time has absolutely informed central banks to realize there is something about digital currency that we need to take seriously.
For sure.
Right? We need to react. And the only thing they're reacting to is the development of Bitcoin.
Yes. Yeah, the CBDC is just a competitive response to Bitcoin, without a doubt. Okay. We didn't get into the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Not too much, no, yeah.
Let's talk about that. What's going on with the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Like, what is in your view of, there's a story we're told here in the West about what happened, right? Putin's a bad guy and he invaded Ukraine. I assume it's a little more complicated than that. What's the actual situation in this conflict, and why is it so important to Russia?
So you're asking all the right questions, man. The narrative that we've been told is that this is an unlawful war. What nobody's telling you is, according to the rules and the laws of war, there is no lawful war.
Sure.
Our invasion of Afghanistan was unlawful.
Right.
Our invasion of Kuwait was unlawful. War is not a lawful thing.
Yes.
So you got to take that argument off the table. It wasn't an unlawful invasion of Ukraine any more than any other war has ever been unlawful. What we have to recognize is that it's not a conflict that's equal on both sides, right? Ukraine was a burgeoning, like a democracy in progress. If you look at how it was rated by Amnesty International and think tanks out there, it gets a 60%, a 6 out of 10 in terms of its democratic functionality prior to the invasion on February 24th. So when you consider the fact that it wasn't really a democracy, it was a transitioning democracy, a burgeoning democracy, that means the rest of it was not a democracy. It was a corrupt, defunct government. A big part of the reason that so much money, so much material, so many weapons have had to be sent to Ukraine to break even, right, where they are right now, is a sign of that corruption. A lot of those materials, weapons, medicines have all been stolen, resold, repackaged, and used for corrupt purposes by Ukrainians, right? It's not been a clean, unified war. That's what we've been told, but that's not actually what it's been on the field. And when you talk to the consultants, the contractors, the nonprofits that have actually been there and served there, they'll all tell you the truth. They'll tell you, it's not what we're told.
Yeah.
But the American people and the engine of donation needs to be primed, right? We have seen that interest and that passion wane over the last year and 2 months, right? We've seen it happen. And that's the game that Putin is really playing. He knows that Ukraine is an existential threat to Russia. Losing Ukraine is the end of Russia.
Because it's a point of invasion? Is that right?
Because Russia is a energy state.
Yeah.
It makes its money off of exporting energy. When you look at a map of how energy flows out of Russia and into Europe, its primary buyer, those pipelines, the vast majority of them come to a connection in the Donbas region, underground. And then from there, they're transferred to the rest of Europe.
Gotcha.
So Ukraine can't be outside of the Russian sphere of influence, or else Russia essentially becomes dependent on whoever controls Ukraine.
Because it's revenues. Yeah.
Right. It's an economic war.
Yeah.
And Russia doesn't have natural resources otherwise. It's not like they have anything they can use to make international trade, definitely not be a global power competitor like they used to be. So losing Ukraine is a massive issue for them. That's separate from the encroachment of NATO. That's separate from the growing influence of the West coming up against the Russians, right? Those are all things that we've been told. Nobody's making the very basic, very fundamental, talking point for us Americans, hey, if Russia loses power over Ukraine, Russia is leveraged.
Right.
They're at the behest of whoever controls Ukraine. So Putin can't lose that. Do you remember when we were told that Putin had brain cancer? Or when we were told that he was going to be taken down from the inside? We've heard the most amazing, ridiculous theories over the last 16 or so months about how Russia hates Putin. And yet here we are.
Yeah.
Right? With the Ukrainians and the world expecting this massive counteroffensive that Ukraine's going to launch against Russia. At the same time, Russia's doubling down. And if anything, this month, Russia is back up to pre-production levels, pre-war production levels of oil and exports. So the ruble is up, or the Russian ruble is up. They're back to pre-war exports of their oil, which means there are buyers buying their oil in the face of record sanctions.
Right.
Russia's not losing. They're not losing. They're not weak. They're not anything that we're being told they are.
Yeah.
They may be struggling. They may be, scrappy. They may be resourceful, but guess who else is all those things? Ukraine.
Yeah.
But for some reason, the story we're being told about Ukraine is how resourceful and brave they are.
Yeah.
And what we're being told about Russia is how weak and flimsy they are.
Wow.
It's just not a complete story.
It's amazing that we never get that simple truth that all wars, all armed conflict is ultimately economic, right? It's driven by the economics of the situation. You never get that in the narrative, right? We always get this ideological bullshit of here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. But it really is quite that simple, right? The Russia is a business. It's a giant monopoly on violence that exports a lot of energy. And if Ukraine is a bottleneck and therefore a single point of failure for the exportation of that energy, then the monopoly on violence is going to rise to defend or conquer, control, whatever you want to say, that channel for exporting their primary export.
Yep. It's a mirror image of what we were just talking about with China and Taiwan.
Yeah,
right. The U.S. is so invested in the semiconductor manufacturing capability of Taiwan.
Yes.
We can't lose it. Russia is so leveraged by the energy that flows through Ukraine that they can't lose it. Right? They're mirror images of each other. And that's why we're watching. That's why so many people are interested in China, because guess who has no dog in either fight, right? China. Right. So China gets to just observe. What's the world doing in Ukraine? Because there's a good likelihood that that's what the world will do,
right,
against when China moves against Taiwan.
So when the West froze $630 billion,
what did the Chinese do?
Russian foreign exchange reserves, the Chinese are paying attention.
Yeah, the Chinese moved their money.
Yeah.
Right? Within weeks, I think it was within 10 days of the Russian assets being frozen, which was illegal and unlawful.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Once that happened, the Chinese moved all their money out of Western banks, out of banks controlled by Western sanctions.
Yes.
Right? They're learning. They're watching and they're learning from our playbook. Right? It's a fascinating thing to see. And the other thing that's really important about what's happening in Ukraine, the story that we're not being told, is that part, to your point about wars are economic, if wars are economic and we're seeing the West is fading in their commitment to supporting Ukraine, why is that? Because they're not seeing the ROI, right? Why are you seeing France, a NATO powerhouse, flying to China? Why are you seeing them openly deny weapons to Ukraine? Why are you seeing the Germans pause on sending Leopard tanks to Ukraine? Why are you seeing the British balk at sending more money? Why are you seeing the United States, the House and the Senate conflicted over sending more money? Because people don't see the ROI anymore. Right. Ideological wars only really work in the newspaper.
Yes.
They don't really work in real life. So people are like,
And that's the bluff Putin called, right? He's like, fuck you, I got the energy. So print all the money you want, run all the propaganda you want. Like, we've got the energy you can't live without.
And he also knows he doesn't have a choice.
Yeah.
He's very much a wild animal trapped in a corner.
Mm-hmm.
He can't lose Ukraine on his watch.
You never want to fight someone backed into a corner.
And the reason that he's still in power is because if somebody takes him out of power, then they're going to lose Ukraine on that guy's watch.
Yeah.
Which is going to mean that guy's the end of the Russian dominant power. Like, Putin's is a perfect peg right now, and he knows he is, because he either wins and he becomes the hero of Russia, or Ukraine is lost and Russia dies anyway. So what does Putin care?
Wow.
Right? He's got nothing here to lose and everything to gain.
Yeah. I dated a Russian girl for a little while, and she told me that it's divided inside of Russia. That basically a lot of people hate him, a lot of people love him. Sounded like a Trump type figure here in the U.S. Amazing how quickly this all came about,
The really interesting thing to me too is that when you mix together both conflicts, when you mix together and you consider what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Taiwan, right? The world is going through a supply chain crisis.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest things that it's hard to get through the supply chain is semiconductors. So Ukraine has been fighting a war using Western weapons, donated by Western countries. But the weapons that they've been donated are not being resupplied. because the semiconductors that are needed to create those next generation weapons are tied up in a supply chain.
Wow.
So we're sending weapons. UK sending weapons, France, Germany, Poland, everybody's sending weapons that they're not restocking, or they're restocking at a rate that's slower than what they're sending. So we're depleting our own ability to defend ourselves. Meanwhile, China controls the supply chain for most of those semiconductors. So when you do the calculation about what will a future conflict with China look like, will it happen or won't it happen? It's well known inside the US government. It's not a secret. It's just not publicly disclosed often that there is a supply chain shortage of advanced weapons. We've given them all away. Yeah. We're not resupplying them. We're not remaking them at a rate that is enough to defend the homeland. So we have to ask ourselves the question, do we keep sending these weapons to Ukraine?
Right.
Or do we keep some of these in reserve because we are actually going through a supply chain shortage that's indicative of what we're afraid of having happen if TSMC, if Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing capability goes under Chinese control.
Wow. It's a lot to take in. Okay, so all of this going on in the world, the cost, of course, is being borne by the taxpayer, as it always is. What can, the average person do to prepare themselves for the challenges or, I guess the potential shortages of food or lack of safety, supply chain disruptions? Are there things like practical things people can be thinking about or doing to prepare themselves and protect themselves from whatever uncertainty is on the horizon?
Yeah, everything that we need to be thinking about when it comes to protecting ourselves is really tied up with assets. Because if you recall, we started this conversation talking about how money is opportunity. So if you want to have opportunity a year from now, 18 months from now, 2 years from now, when stuff just gets worse, right? When conflict between the US and China gets even closer to the brink of armed conflict, when we're going through the transition of another nasty presidential race, when Ukraine is being decided one way or the other, not to mention whatever happens everywhere else in the world, right? Like Sudan is on fire right now. You've got conflict all over the Congo right now. You've got issues in Thailand right now. The whole world is having issues. We're just having issues also. So if you want to protect yourself and give yourself opportunities, you really need to be looking at your asset pool. If you own a business, your business is an asset. Find a way to fine-tune your business so it's generating more revenue. Reduce your costs, maximize your revenue, keep your profits in the actual bank account for the business, reinvest it to make more money, find that positive ROI. Get yourself out of the system of slavery that we've been talking about where you're dependent on someone else giving you money. If you're already trapped in that system where you are working for a paycheck because you're a wage laborer or whatever else, you have assets that you need to protect some other way. Whether that means you're putting cash in between your mattresses or whether that means you're investing in Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency, find a way to protect your asset because it is the only thing you have right now. Where we're going, we're on the brink of loan default, right? If that happens, Social Security takes a drop, unemployment spikes, people get laid off, paychecks dry up. What are you going to do then, right? If you are going to spend your money, don't invest your money into garbage, which is what the consumer mindset wants you to invest in. Buy a new iPhone, buy another pair of shoes, buy a designer jacket. Don't buy garbage. Right now, if you need to spend an asset doing something that will bring you some kind of return, right? Learn how to protect your money, learn how to protect your family. I have a company that teaches people how to protect their family, how to protect their business, how to protect themselves. I mean, you're going to be better off spending $27 with me than spending $27 on a new pair of shoes, right? People are going to be better off investing their money into some kind of protected cryptocurrency that's outside of the reach of the central bank than they're going to be putting money into another mutual fund.
Yeah.
Right? That's tied to an irresponsible banking system that may very well go default, right? Even treasuries. This is what's crazy. Treasury insurance, which is unheard of, is at an all-time high right now. People are buying insurance to insure the 5-year yield on their government bond. These people don't trust that the bond will actually come to fruition.
Right. Which is supposed to be the counterparty that never fails.
Yes. It's insane. The way the world is going right now, you've got to look at your assets and realize they are your assets and they are limited. Yeah. That is the true law of economics, right? Economics is based on the law of scarcity. There is always a limited amount. There is never an unlimited amount. We've been talking all day about economics, the power of economics, the undeniable truth of economics, and that's what we're talking about right now. Your assets are scarce, and you are the only one who wants to protect them. Everybody else wants to take them.
Yeah, and so under those conditions, you also want assets that you can fully control, right? Again, bank accounts, well, we take them for granted because they tend to work here in the West, but if you ask the protesters in the Canadian truck convoy, well, those didn't work.
Anybody had money tied up with the 3 banks that just failed?
Exactly. Bank failures, index funds, mutual funds, all of these things, they're counterparty laden. So if things do get really bad, you can't necessarily depend on those things to materialize. So yeah, in those extreme conditions that we hopefully don't get into, but we have many, many times across human history, so I don't want to discount the possibility, you need assets you can fully control, right? Physical gold, physical Bitcoin, guns, currency, food, energy, tools, etc.
Do you know who's not worried about the future? The wealthy. I mean, I'm not even that. I don't even fall under the level of wealth that my clients fall under. And I'm not worried about the future. Like,
that's because you've invested so much in yourself.
Exactly. And you have too. I have a feeling you don't lose sleep worrying about your assets in the future because you know how they work and you can.
Well, no, thank God for Bitcoin.
But that's the thing that's so wild to me is like money buys you opportunity. And when I talk to the ultra high net worth clients that I work with, when I talk to senior executives in Fortune 10 companies, they're eager for the future because they see the opportunity.
Right.
They see the opportunity that comes from chaos, collapse, panic, fear.
Yeah.
They see it. They know everybody else is going to panic. Human behavior is predictable, and the strong prey on the weak.
Yeah. I forgot who said that the best time to invest is when there's blood in the streets. Brutal, but probably true. Okay, so obviously protecting assets, protecting money, very important to protect your opportunity as we go into this uncertain world. Speaking of money, like to what extent do you think a theme we explore on the show a lot is the connection between money and mind? Like we're often thinking through money when we calculate a price or negotiate a deal or we perform any type of economic planning. We're thinking about going on a vacation or buying a business, whatever it may be. There seems to be this connection between money and our mind, like it's an extension of the human mind in a way, particularly through the pricing system. To what extent do you think government monopolization and control over money is used as a proxy for manipulating and controlling the minds of individuals?
So when it comes to considering matters of state, one of the things that I often encourage people to think through is something called Hanlon's razor. You've heard of Occam's razor, right? So Hanlon's razor says never subscribe to conspiracy, that which can be explained through idiocy.
Okay.
Right?
It's kind of an Occam's razor in and of itself, right?
Yeah. So don't give credit to a complicated conspiracy if it's easier to give credit to someone just being stupid.
Incompetence.
Right. Incompetence. Yeah. And the government, the federal government especially, is, as much as we all love to be Americans, we've seen the incompetence of government. It lends itself to incompetence. It's a perfect example of how a few very competent people manage a larger pool of incompetent people. So I don't believe that the government is organized or efficient enough to actually be able to manipulate the thinking patterns of people. Not when I compare that instead to the fact that they're thinking very stupidly. They're thinking, we need to put more money into the economy. How do we put more money into the economy if people don't generate more money? We extend them lines of credit. We make it easier for them to borrow. We print more money, right? Nobody's thinking 5 years down the road because no one's going to be in office for more than 4 years down the road.
Broken incentives.
Exactly. So it's like, we just need to make people happy now so that they'll vote Republican or vote Democrat again for the next election cycle. So nobody's invested long term. Nobody's got skin in the game. Professional politicians, the thing they're working for is their political career, not the improvement of the American people. That's, again, the reason that rich landowners founded this country on the idea that politicians would be professionals that stepped out of their career and sacrificed as public servants for a short period. Their vision was never what we have now, right? Trump was the closest thing that the United States has ever seen to what they actually wanted the president to look like. A career professional who stepped out to become a political servant, right? And he wasn't a great fit either, but that's how it's supposed to be. So yeah, I don't think that I understand the concern, the conspiracy behind it, but just logically speaking, it's more likely that they're just not thinking things through. They're just trying to stimulate an economy in any way that they can, because they know that anything they break today, someone else has to clean up later.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. We often consider incentives kind of be the ground stuffs of human action, right? Like, what's the old saying that no man is better than his incentives? So we all are constantly responding to incentives. And so when you frame politics that way, right, that they just have very short-term incentives. So they're willing to do whatever is necessary to get elected in this current cycle and defer all the costs and hide all the cost onto the next guy, basically. It creates these conditions of incompetence, basically. And then perhaps us as citizens, we're observing that, thinking, oh, there's some big conspiracy theory out there to make all these terrible things that are happening. But the reality is the incentives are just broken, and we're observing the manifestation of discordant human action inside of an incentive system that's not properly structured.
Right. We're taught at the agency that there's a recipe for conspiracies, right? That when conspiracy theories are born, there's a very predictable process that leads to them, right? And that process has 4 steps. The first step is there has to be something factual. Something actually has to happen, some fact. The second step is that in the tail of that fact, there's a gap of information, something that we don't know. And then the third step is in the face of that unknown information, we become suspicious, right? We become skeptical. Now, is suspicion a bad thing? No. There's healthy suspicion. Suspicion is what keeps us alive. Suspicion is supposed to work for us. But when you're following this step-by-step process of where a conspiracy theory comes from, what we become suspicious of is not the missing information. We become suspicious of why the information is missing, right? So fact-based events, missing information, healthy suspicion, then it leads to this inherent flaw in the human brain where we have to close thought loops.
Right.
So when we don't have the information we need to close our loop, we create a story.
We fill the void.
And especially with conspiracy theories, the first person to create a story that closes the loop, that becomes the story that other people adopt. Because it's easier to adopt an existing story than it is to come up with your own critical story, right? Your own critical thinking. So that process is what leads to conspiracy theories. That's why some conspiracy theories turn out to be true.
Yeah,
because they're a very set pattern of events, and it just so happens that sometimes the story is accurate for the missing information.
Right.
But in plenty of cases, it's not.
Yeah.
But that's where these things persist, and they fit very well into the human condition because we want a closed loop. We want everything to be packaged very nicely so that we can start a conversation over a glass of wine and finish the conversation over a glass of wine. We don't want to walk away from the table with no answers.
Yeah. Man, I heard a great interview, I think it was Rick Rubin on the Huberman podcast, and he was articulating a similar point. It was like, as humans, we're always dealing with incomplete information, like radically incomplete. We just see one thing happen through our 5 senses, and we see another thing happen through our 5 senses, and then we close the gap with story. It's like we have, 0.1% of the total information, and then we just fill in the gap with some narrative. And we need to do that. Like, we need to be able to deal with the complexities of the world. But it definitely seems to open us up to deception, either by others or even by ourselves, self-deception. Are there conspiracy theories? Maybe we'll just go through a few and see if you subscribe to them or not. I mentioned one to you offline that a friend, I guess I won't name him, just a friend shared with me recently in Miami that he was operating under the assumption that nuclear weapons were actually much less devastating than we've been led to believe. And I think you had some views on that.
Yeah, I don't know where that is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with nuclear weapons. I was a nuclear missile officer for the Air Force until 2007 when I was recruited by CIA.
Mm.
So I'll be the first one to admit that the information I have is, just under 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in charge of nuclear weapons, they were 100% as devastating as they had been promised to be. If anything, we had found a way to make their devastation even more efficient, right? Concentrate the fireball, change the altitude of the detonation, increase the number of warheads that are on a single delivery vehicle, right? Like they're every bit as devastating as you expect them to be. We've just been spoiled because we haven't been testing them since the 1950s, I think.
Yeah.
So because we created a treaty where we do not demonstrate the effectiveness of our nuclear weapons anymore, we essentially have 2 generations of people who have been born and have never actually seen a detonated nuclear device.
So the devastation of those is confirmed through, if we're not seeing it, what is it? How do you confirm this?
So there's a couple of different ways, right? So it's usually done through mathematical models.
Okay.
So when an engineer or when a nuclear weapons technician creates a weapon, they know what level of purity their uranium is or their plutonium is. They know the size of that plutonium. They know the charge, the shape of the charge. They know the detonating device. They know everything about the weapon. And they can use those to program into models how that weapon will perform based off of what they know about mathematical models previously proven true through our testing process.
Gotcha.
And that's how we do it here in the U.S. Russia does it very similarly. China does it very similarly. But then you also have the events in North Korea and sometimes in China as well, where they still detonate underground.
Yeah.
The treaty said that we would not detonate above ground.
Oh, okay.
So we've absolutely seen in our lifetime detonations happen in underground testing facilities, right?
What about the moon landing in the 60s? Did that actually happen, or is that a conspiracy?
I believe that is a empty conspiracy, right?
Okay.
Because are there some strange, almost unbelievable things that we were able to do in the 1960s? Yeah, there are.
Yeah.
But we also know that we continued to explore space from that time forward. So either we happened to coordinate this perfect conspiracy, and then just in time, we developed the real technology to send people into space and send satellites into space and start capturing pictures on the Hubble telescope, et cetera, or we actually did land on the moon. It's very interesting to me, especially when I hear conspiracies like liquid space or flat Earth conspiracies.
I've never heard of liquid space.
Yeah, there is a conspiracy out there that space is not a vacuum, that space is actually a liquid, and that we've been lied to because nobody's been to space, because they know if they went to space, they would drown, right? So there's some strange, interesting ideas out there, but it all falls into that same recipe that we were talking about, right? There's a gap of information.
Yeah.
Whether that gap of information is something that the government has kept from you, or whether that gap of information is something where the information that's been given to you, you just don't accept, right? And I feel like the space landing is a very good example of, there's plenty of proof out there that we landed it in space, right? There's moon rocks, there's footprints that have been taken in images from satellites. Like there's independent corroborative pieces of proof that have either all been constructed in a great grand conspiracy, which according to Hanlon's razor doesn't happen, or they actually happened and you're just rejecting the proof of what you've seen, right? 9/11 and what was it, Building 7?
Yeah.
Right?
That was gonna be...
Or even the cause of 9/11 being self-imposed, right? Like these are conspiracies that I absolutely understand why they exist, because they fit the recipe.
Yeah.
But the preponderance of evidence just doesn't hold up to Hanlon's razor.
What about Building 7, though? It was 6 blocks away from the destruction, wasn't hit, and then it went down like controlled demolition. What's up with that?
I have no idea. I don't know the answers. I don't know the answers. And what I've heard of some of the conspiracies involve CIA hidden buildings or hidden offices, and I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah.
I was part of operations that were heavily compartmented.
Yeah. So
if there was a CIA office in Building 7, it was heavily compartmented.
Yeah.
So it's not the kind of thing that is going to be available information for anyone to get.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer, but I also don't necessarily believe that the conspiracy is correct.
Yeah.
Is there some strange mystery around it? For me, yes.
Yeah.
Is that mystery worth my time, effort, energy, and money?
Yeah, it definitely feels like we are wired to, like you said, we want to close the loop, I guess, is that feeling. It's like, well, what did happen? And it leaves that feeling of drawing in your attention. I guess I will admit, I'm a bit skeptical on the moon landing in that I saw the one video of the American flag actually waving on the moon. And that just, it's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. The moon has no atmosphere. There's no wind. Why is the flag waving? Did we put some mechanics in the flag to make it look like it's waving or something? I don't know. That threw me for a bit of a loop with the moon landing.
I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, when I think about the fact that we sense, I mean, I agree with you. A flag waving in space doesn't make a lot of sense.
Unless it's liquid, I guess.
But neither does the idea that we went from nothing to sending 3 men in a shuttle, like in a capsule to the moon and back again, where they walked on the surface. Like, that's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
A little bit of flitter and a flag, yes, that's weird. What the fuck? Nobody's questioning like how much insane progress was made during the space race.
Well, why haven't we done it since? Why? It's almost like we could never do it, then all of a sudden we did it, and then all of a sudden we never did it again. It's like, well, that's strange. Usually when humans start doing something, we keep doing it, right?
Well, I would argue that we have done, like, we've sent more people into space.
But not to the moon, right?
Well, there's no economic benefit in the moon, right? Like, the economic benefit of sending people to the moon was essentially a benefit of winning the space race.
So it was just a flex, and then we were done flexing.
Correct.
Because there's nothing to mine on the moon.
Right. So, I mean, the first astronaut in space to spacewalk was a cosmonaut. So the Russians beat us to that.
Yeah.
The Russians beat us to getting a satellite in space.
Yeah.
Sputnik beat any American satellite, right? Well, after they launched a satellite, they didn't launch another one right away. They moved on to the next challenge.
Yeah.
Once they had a cosmonaut do a spacewalk, they moved on to the next challenge, right? Look at Red Bull. Red Bull's a fantastic example of this. They do some crazy ass shit, right? A dude jumps off of one airplane and lands in another airplane or whatever else it might be, right? They do this crazy stuff, but they don't do it again.
Yeah.
Right? Because the profitability of it was just in doing it the first time.
Right.
Then they're on to the next thing
Got
to
it.
prove that they can keep pushing the boundaries.
So it's a spectacle initially, and then once you've done it, it's kind of
That's where the profitability comes from.
Yeah.
That's where the ROI is.
right.
America is more powerful than Russia because we landed on the moon first.
Just a flex. And then Russia gave it up once we did it because we won.
I mean, yeah, well, because they
They ever
lost.
put anyone on
They
the
had
moon?
lost a space race. That's a good question. I actually don't know if cosmonauts.
I don't know if they did.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Wasabi Wallet. With Wasabi Wallet, you can receive, send, and store Bitcoin privately. In Wasabi Wallet, your transaction history and wallet balance are completely hidden. Wasabi Wallet is easy to use, all of its privacy features are built in by default, and it works with any amount of Bitcoin. Wasabi users can make CoinJoin transactions together with BTC Pay server users or Trezor Suite users. For BTC Pay server users, they can make payments directly inside of a CoinJoin, and for Trezor Suite users, you can make CoinJoins directly on a hardware wallet. These features result in fee savings and security improvements for both sets of users. So go to wasabiwallet.io today to download the state-of-the-art Bitcoin privacy wallet.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Casa. Casa makes it simple to buy and secure your Bitcoin without wondering whether you're doing it right. Specifically, Casa provides a multi-key custody solution, which is by far the most secure way to custody your Bitcoin. Now, when I talk about Bitcoin being theft-proof money or inviolable private property, a multi-key custody model is exactly what I am talking about. Using multiple keys lets you maintain full control of your Bitcoin while also giving you redundancy in case you lose one of the keys. It's also the best way to secure your Bitcoin for inheritance planning purposes. So go to keys.casa, that's C-A-S-A, today to sign up and use discount code BREEDLOVE.
Okay, this might tie into something we were talking about offline too, which was this idea that enemies learn from one another all the time, right? Like whatever strategy is being employed against you in war or in business or any conflictual environment, you're adapting to that strategy that's being imposed upon you, and you're very likely to probably use that against that enemy or other enemies in the future. And this could tie into Rene Girard's work on mimesis, where he talks about humans always imitating one another, and we're doing it at different levels, perhaps. What happens, though, when you stop learning from your enemy? I think you gave the example of the United States, right? As a global superpower, it gets kind of in a position of, I guess, sitting on its high horse, thinking it doesn't need to adapt and respond to these changes as much because it presumably controls the environment. What are I guess, is that accurate to say that enemies are emulating one another? And then what are the dangers of failing to do that?
Yeah, this is another great place, I think, for sports analogies, right? What do competing football teams in high school do? They watch the tape of their upcoming match. Like whoever they're playing against, they watch their tape from the previous week
in detail over and over again. Yeah.
To learn and then they create plays that counter the plays that they know and they see in the tape.
Yes.
Right. So the idea of learning from your enemy is not new to us.
Yeah.
We've been doing it for a long time. If you look at how the Spartans developed weapons, how the Greeks developed weapons, how Aborigines developed weapons, they developed weapons to counter the weapons that were being used against them.
Right.
Right. What did we do in the space race? What did we do in the nuclear race? Why are we constantly developing new weapons ourselves? What's happening in Ukraine?
Yeah.
Right? In Ukraine, we're launching completely new types of weapons. The Ukrainians are innovating new weapons to combat the weapons that are on the battlefield. And you're seeing how that wins, how that works, right? So we are still learning from our enemies to a certain extent. The Ukraine war is a fantastic example of where the American DOD, the American military, gets to watch the Russian military kill Ukrainians with American weapons, countering them. So we get to see how our weapons do in the field without risking American lives. And we get to see what Russian tactics are employed in the field without risking American lives. So there's a lot of net benefit to the United States supporting a conflict in Ukraine, right? And we've got to remember that. We're not there because it's just ideological. There is an ROI, but we don't want to talk about what that ROI is.
Right.
So we are to some extent learning, but then there's so many other places where we stop learning, and we stop learning partially because of like pride,
arrogance,
because we think we're the best. We don't need to learn about how, Brazil is handling sugar crops. We don't have to learn about this. We don't need to worry about, what's happening with the election in Taiwan or in Thailand right now.
Right.
We don't care. It's beneath us. So when something is beneath you and you don't even bother learning from it, you lose the opportunity to learn. But then we also have this thing where we don't learn because we think it's against our ethics or our morals, right? So a fantastic example here is terrorists. Terrorists thrived for a long time by creating cells, terrorist cell networks that were embedded in a local population and just didn't act. They were asleep, right? 3, 5, 12 years. They built a life in London or New York or Boston, wherever, right? And then one day they were activated. To have a 12-year operation like that goes completely against anything we do in the United States because we only have a 5-year budget cycle. So how could we possibly fund an operation for 12 years, right? And then we've got compartmentation.
Yeah.
So when we approve a long-term mission, it has to go through multiple offices that are all need-to-know offices for that operation.
Yeah.
And then you've got people who change positions, right? People who get promoted, fired, or move to different offices. So now you can't control the secret. So you have China using long-term seeding operations against the United States. You got Russians planting illegals in the United States. You have all sorts of intelligence operations, influence operations, hacking operations that are being executed against us by our opponents that we look at the way they're doing it and we tell ourselves ideologically, well, that's immoral. So we're not going to adopt that practice, right? It's the terrorism, the torture argument is a fantastic example of it, right?
We call it enhanced interrogation, right?
And when we're kidnapped by a terrorist organization, are we enhancedly interrogated?
Yeah.
No, we are straight up tortured,
right?
And then we're killed.
Yeah.
So when we capture a terrorist, somehow now it's unethical for us to slap that person in the belly or deny them dinner. How are we going to reprimand the men and women that we've charged with protecting us? We're going to try and govern how they handle a terrorist. And we're going to ridicule them and end their careers and potentially put them in jail when the other side is not extending the same grace to us. All we're doing is losing an opportunity ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? Now, to a certain extent, we get to claim in, 10 years down the road, well, we took the moral high ground and we are better for it. I would say we took the moral high ground and we have lost more lives for it.
Yeah.
So as long as you're willing to as long as some politician can stand up on a pedestal and say, yeah, we killed 25 people being on the ethical high ground. We killed 25 Americans being on the ethical high ground and not torturing terrorists. But hey guys, I'm really proud of us. Right? I would much rather have that person stand up and be like, we tortured the hell out of some terrorists. We saved a lot of American lives.
Yeah.
Because I don't see all lives as equal.
Right.
American lives come first in my eyes.
Okay.
And if that makes me a bad person, that makes me a bad person.
Oh, it makes you patriotic, I think, at least. Is this just... Because as you're saying that, I'm reflecting on, even when we tell stories in our personal lives, right? There's that saying that there's 3 sides to every story, his side, her side, and the truth. That we're always, maybe even unconsciously, bending the story to suit our interest to some extent, right? Depending on who we're telling, when we're telling it, what the purpose of that conversation is. Like, we're going to emphasize certain aspects of the event and de-emphasize others. Is this just part of like the human condition too, that we can't help but bend? Well, we have to tell stories, as we've established. The story is never going to be a perfect representation of reality, so we're always just going to use that wiggle room to kind of bend it to our advantage, even if it's unconscious.
What we're talking about here isn't really about bending the truth. It's about the human need for connection, right? We are a tribal animal. We're a pack animal. Yeah. Yes, you're right that we're more than just animals. We also have a spiritual element and, a philosophical element, but we are still some portion of animal. And without a community, without a pack, we know we will die. And that's why loneliness is such a problem for for humans, and especially for Americans, right? So when I choose to share a story with you, or when you choose to share a story with me, or we share a story with our audience, we are inherently shaping the story to justify our actions so that we will be accepted, because we want to be accepted into a community so that we belong to something. That's the his side and her side, right? His side is telling his story because he wants to be accepted by the other hises and he's listening, right? She's telling a story from her point of view so she can be accepted by all the other she's hearing the story. And then you're right, there's the cold hard truth. What's really fascinating is that the truth is that just telling the truth will build a community on its own, because that's what so few people get and what most people are looking for. So what I really respect about what you're doing is that you are telling the truth as you know it, as you've studied it, as you've seen it, as you've practiced it, as you live it, right? That is the truth. It's not your slant. It's not your bias. If anything, your bookshelves are full of books that demonstrate your willingness to try to break yourself out of your personal bias. You are trying to create the truth because that's what you want. And then you're attracting people who want the truth along with you. I can back someone like that all day long, because there's enough people out there twisting the truth to try to glorify themselves.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think I am trying to do that, but also running into my own limitations, like still finding myself like not exactly saying it the way I meant to say it, and it's often when you're kind of caught off guard, I found it's like, oh, someone asks you a thing, you like say it real quick, and then you might reflect on it later and be like, wow, I could have said that differently. I de-emphasized something or emphasized something that was for a reason. And so like you detect, I don't know, it's weird when you're constantly trying to step outside of yourself and then reevaluate how you acted in a situation. I still find myself just being biased, right? Doing all the things that we're all prone to.
And that's exactly right. We're prone to it. You're prone to it and I'm prone to it. The difference is trained people, and you are kind of self-trained here. Trained people become aware of that bias. Untrained people are completely blind to their own bias.
And this kind of perhaps ties into the thing I was sharing earlier, where it's human history is like one PSYOP after another. I mean, you could maybe think of these as little mini PSYOPs in a way, right? I'm thinking when you start to, if we're using his side, her side, and the truth, when he and her start to date, typically the first few dates, both he and her are putting their best foot forward. They're trying to emphasize their qualities and attributes, their positive attributes, and de-emphasize their problems and their childhood traumas and all that. So is that it? Like, we're always by necessity playing pretend a little bit, and we're competing in a way too, right? Like trying to get the best mate or get the best job or the best deal, whatever it is. So we're always using that little bit of separation between the cold hard truth and the narrative to try and wiggle that space to our advantage in a way. And maybe that the aggregate outcome of that are these PSYOPs that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that your example isn't inaccurate. For sure, there's that wiggle room that we're using because we're seeking acceptance. Mm-hmm. His and hers is a fantastic example. When we date, we're looking for acceptance. Mm-hmm. We want to be accepted into each other's good graces. We want to be accepted into each other's lives. We want to be accepted into each other's beds, right? There's a lot of acceptance going on. The other thing that comes to my mind when you talk about this is that we're taught at the agency that everybody has 3 lives, right? 3 lives. There's a public life, a private life, and a secret life. The public life is the life that you're talking about right now. We emphasize our strengths. We obfuscate our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities. We try to make ourselves look stronger than we are, more courageous than we are, smarter than we are, so that we will be accepted, because that's the persona we want to project to others. It's something that we do unconsciously. It's something that we're conditioned to do from childhood because that's just the way human beings connect and collaborate, right? We want to look attractive to others. So that's all of our public life. Everybody who's a friend, everybody who's an associate, everybody who's a professional connection, they're all part of your public life. But then you have a private life too. Now your private life is for a much smaller group of people, right? Intimate friends, intimate family. If in your public life, people think that you're super smart, in your private life, they know that your breath actually smells. They know that you're lactose intolerant, right? They know that you have a weird patch of hair that grows on your lower back, right? Your intimate family, your kids, your wife, your, whatever, your parents, they know that about you. But that's okay because they're part of your private life. Right? They can see through the public life and they know who you really are in private. But then we still have a third life, a secret life. And inside that secret life, we may never let anyone in. We may only let 1 or 2 people in. In that secret life is where our shame lives. It's where our guilt lives. It's where those secrets live.
Insecurities.
The things that you and I have done, that we know we've done, that we've never told anybody ever. And there's many more of those secrets than any of us have ever cared to remember. Right? Even as we say this, I know they're
coming up.
Right? If you tell somebody one of those secrets, you're letting them into your secret life. Now, what CIA tells us is so powerful about this is that once you let someone into your secret life, you never let them out. So you can move someone from public life into private life, and if they disappoint you or let you down, you can move them back to public life, right? They go back and forth. But when you move someone from private life to secret life and you share that level of vulnerability with them, even if you're mad at them, disappointed by them, don't trust them, you never really let them out of your secret life. So espionage is a game of getting people to let you into their secret life.
Wow.
Because then you gain all the leverage. You gain all the power. You know that they've been cheating on their wife since they were married 3 years. You know that they have 2 illegitimate kids. You know that they're secretly addicted to cocaine. You know that they love child pornography. You know, whatever it is. You know their secrets in their secret life. And they can't help but trust you because you are the only other person carrying the burden of those secrets.
Wow.
Right? And when someone else carries the burden of your secrets, you're intrinsically connected to them.
And that's why you can't remove them.
Because their loyalty to you is unending.
Wow. And then once you have gained access to their secret life, you have the dirt on them. Presumably that's a very high leverage possession or control mechanism, right?
We call it coercion.
Coercion, yeah.
It's a tool called coercion. Now, coercion is the weakest of all tools to use, which is why when you get the dirt, the most valuable thing to understand is that you never want to exploit the dirt. What you always want to do is sell them the hope behind the dirt, right? Like, I know you've got a problem with opioids. I know you're addicted to opioids. And I know you've been hiding it from the whole world. And one day, together, we're going to get you past it. But today, you need to perform, and you need your opioid today, right? So today, I need you to go and have this meeting and get this secret and come back and bring it to me so that we can change the world. And we're not going to do that if we start cleaning you up today.
So is that part of the espionage game then? Is to get into their secret world, know that weak point or point of high leverage, and then you just press that point to inspire the behaviors that suit your interest or your boss's interest, I guess.
That's not part of the game. That is
the game.
That is what makes a spy worth the $2.5 million of training that they get.
Wow.
To learn how to do that systematically and predictably with any culture, any gender, any age, any level of education.
That's incredible. Well, that sounds like some cool schooling too.
It's super cool schooling, and it's a great tool to have. And it serves in business and in the commercial world too, because people still have secret lives. Yeah. And when a client lets you into their secret life for any reason, their secret fears or shame or guilt about their business, or their shame or their fears about failing their family, when they let you in, when you can help them through that, when you can make them stronger, when you can make them more courageous, they love you for it. And you're improving the productivity of them and their business that they're own, and the business they're part of, and the country that you're in, and the legacy that you're leaving.
I was just going to say, because to gain access to someone's secret life also sounds like deep best friendship or something you'd want with your significant other. So it's weird that the game of espionage is to gain access to that secret life, but that's also the game of love, right? Between friends or between romantic partners, that you want to have someone that you can divulge or invite into that secret life and be invited into their secret life.
Right. You want it, but at the same time, if we're being honest with each other, we kind of don't. Right? When I sit across from my wife and she's having a hard day, I love my wife. I don't really want to be part of that, right? She's got all sorts of secret life drama going on. She's got stuff coming up from her childhood. She's got, grief from her grandmother dying, and she's got guilt about being a mom. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm really comfortable in the private life where I know you have guilt and grief and shame and fear, but I really don't want to be part of it right now, right? And that's really what the game of love tends to be. And that's why we have a crazy 52% divorce rate or something like that, right? Because we don't really actually want anyone in our secret life, and we really don't want to put the investment into being part of somebody else's secret life.
So then,
because the ROI isn't there.
Right. Are you then also trained, if you're trained to infiltrate the secret lives of others, are you also trained to prevent infiltration of your own secret life?
Absolutely. The tool that we use for that is something called know, like, trust. So there's a process in which you meet somebody, right? When you don't know somebody, they're a stranger to you. You never have to worry about that person gaining access to your secret life. So then you meet the person. Now that's the know, the K and KLT, the know and know, like, trust. Now you know the person exists. But knowing the person exists doesn't necessarily mean you like them. So over time, you realize you have things in common, you think the same way, you have, similar ideals, you grew up in similar households, whatever else. Over time, you start to develop a liking for somebody. This is where things get dangerous, because as you learn to like somebody, you absolutely naturally and unintentionally slip into trusting them. Anybody who's ever been let down, anybody who's ever trusted somebody that didn't deserve their trust knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's very easy to fall into a pattern of not knowing someone exists, and then you know them, and then you get along really great and you like them, and before you know it, you act in ways where you trust them, even though you have no reason to trust them. That's know, like, trust. What we're trained as CIA operatives is that when know, like, trust happens quickly, that's a big red flag that you're dealing with somebody who's trained. Because a trained person can get you through KLT in an immense amount of time. The average time it takes for a CIA officer to get into the secret life of a target is 9 months. For especially hard targets, like the people who inherently distrust Americans or inherently distrust the United States, that process becomes more like 15 to 18 months. But that's our system. We know how frequently, how often, what to talk about, what to bring things, like what to bring up, what to push on, so that we can get into a target's secret life within 9 months.
Wow.
Right? Most engagements last more than 12 months. Most dating relationships exceed 2 years. right? So, I mean, that's 3 years from meeting to marriage on average, and people still aren't in each other's secret life.
Wow. Then I guess you end up with this inner sanctum of secret life as a trained covert operative to just, you'd never connect that with anyone else in the world.
Or when you do, it's a very intentional choice, right? Like my wife is a former CIA officer.
Mm-hmm.
I trust my wife explicitly. I trust her implicitly. I trust her completely.
Mm-hmm.
I still have things I would never tell her.
Wow.
And she knows that. And she understands that because when I tell her that there are secret life topics that I don't want to share with her, she knows that those must be so fucking dark, so shameful, so significant that it's going to negatively impact her to even hear about them. So she's okay not being part
So
of
she
it.
doesn't pry. She doesn't try to, what was it? No,
like trust.
no, like trust. She doesn't try to infiltrate.
She knows that I trust her already.
Yeah.
Right. And I trust her enough to tell her, you don't fucking want to know about that. Right.
That's something kind of beautiful that you guys have this vernacular to understand human psychology, even competitive human psychology, in a way that you can discuss these things that might otherwise destroy a marriage, right? Like you might sense someone holding on to that secret life and maybe the other partner's like, oh, tell me, I want to know. And that could either drive the other partner nuts or they end up letting them in and it was so dark it could blow up. But you guys actually have a framework for talking about these things and dealing with them in a, I guess, healthy way. Sounds like you're happily married.
Yeah. Well, and this is the framework we teach our clients.
Yeah.
So our clients can have the same conversations with us, right? So I can talk to a client and I can say, I feel like we're butting up against a secret life issue here. Is that true? And they can say, yeah, it's a secret life issue. And I can give them the option like, hey, do you want to let me into that? Or do you not want to let me into that? Right. And similarly, we can teach them personality profiling and we can teach them how they can use this vernacular with their spouse, with their children, with their business partner, right? How many businesses have failed because partners can't connect?
It's communication. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's incredible the wealth of commercial and business experience and expertise that CI sits on every day.
Yeah.
And they don't realize it because they can't monetize it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's been the big blessing that I've had. I don't claim to be the best. I'm not the best ex-CIA officer. I wasn't the best CIA officer. I'm not the best businessman. I'm just the first person who's been able to connect and teach this language so people can use these skills practically and immediately in the everyday world.
That's so cool. Okay. So we were talking about the secret life, and you had mentioned that once an operative gains access to one's secret life, they can then leverage that access to coerce them into certain behaviors. And you said at that point that coercion was one of, and I think you said like the lightest of these weapons. I think you may have said weapons, I'm not sure. What are the other items or weapons or categories besides coercion?
Yeah, so what we're talking about here are core motivations.
Okay.
And core motivations are levers that you can use to control someone's behavior. And there's 4 of them. And they break into a acronym that we at the agency call RICE, R-I-C-E. The R stands for reward. Reward is the first core motivator. The second is ideology. And we spent a lot of time talking about ideology today, right? C is coercion. E is ego.
Okay.
So every human being.
Sorry, what was the R?
The R was reward.
Reward, okay.
Yeah. So every human being, and we define human beings at the agency as anybody with a neurotypical brain.
Okay.
Right. So somebody who's on the autistic spectrum is still a human being, but we may not be calling them average or typical, right? We'd be talking about them as on the spectrum versus a typical human being, right? But a typical human being basically has these 4 core motivators, and everybody has a natural tendency towards one of the 4 more than any other, but all 4 will work for all people. When you look at the 4 in terms of significance and power to actually drive a behavior or control a behavior, they're not equal. The strongest of the 4 is ideology. If you can ideologically connect with somebody, if you can get into their secret life and create or twist their ideology, you essentially have the strongest control over that person you can have. And we've seen this. We've seen this in highly religious communities. You've seen this in extremist terrorist groups. You've seen this in, abusive relationships, right? People can cling to an ideology so strong that they abandon rational thought.
They attach their entire identity to the ideology.
Correct.
So is this where you get divisiveness between left and right wing or vaxxer, anti-vaxxer? It's like people, they tie their identity to the ideology.
Exactly. And then that person becomes very easy to control.
Yes. If you control the ideology.
If you control the ideology, or if you direct the ideology, right?
Yeah.
So you've got it, right? And that's one of the 4 core motivators. That's the strongest. The second strongest is ego. And most people would say that that's fairly obvious, right? When we talk about ego, we're not talking about egotistical. 2 different things, right? Egotistical means somebody who thinks it's all about them. Ego has to do with how you want to be perceived by others. So a very sacrificial person who is not at all egotistical still has an ego. They actively make the sacrifices that they make publicly because they want to be seen as a sacrificial person. They want to be seen as a giver. They want to be seen as a leader. They want to be seen as selfless, right? They have an ego.
Right.
It's just not what we typically call egotistical.
So is that then the actions they're taking to create their public life?
Correct.
Is there ego? Okay.
Correct. They're shaping their public life because of the ego they want to protect or project, right? So RICE, reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. Ideology is the strongest of the 4. Ego is the second strongest. The weakest is coercion. Because if you recall, we're in someone's secret life. We have used the know, like, trust process to build trust with this person to gain access to their secret life. Well, now once we use a coercive technique, once you hold a gun to someone's head, once you give them an ultimatum, once you say, that once you demonstrate a threat that leverages or leans into their shame or their guilt or, their abuse, once you do that, you inherently break part of the trust that they have in you. You introduce the question, the shadow of doubt. Should I trust this person? Should I listen to this person? And even though you're in their secret life, it's very unlikely they're ever going to let you out, right? But that doesn't mean that they're going to give you full cooperation inside their secret life. And that's why coercion is so dangerous, because you only get one chance. If you coerce somebody one time and you're caught, you never get back to where you started ever again. If you've ever been cheated on by a girlfriend or lied to by a family member, right? You never get back to where you were.
Permanent, yeah, for sure.
So coercion it's very high risk for very low return.
Right.
Now, does that mean that we don't coerce people sometimes? No, not at all, because coercion still works.
Yes.
You just have to be prepared that if you're going to coerce, it's never going to be the bond, the connection, the control will never be as strong as it was the first time.
Is it more than a measure of last resort?
That's exactly
you prefer ideology or ego before coercion.
Yep. And then, of course, the missing piece is reward. And reward is difficult because reward changes, right? I would have done a lot of things for $1,000 when I was 18. I wouldn't do much for $1,000 right now, right? And rewards change. A week of vacation paid in Tahiti sounded nice then. I don't really want a week off, and I don't really want to get on a plane to Tahiti. And I've got 2 kids and a wife and a household I have to worry about too. So rewards are constantly shifting. So the power that comes along with being able to control those rewards is also constantly shifting.
Yes.
There was a day where you and I probably would have put our name down on a piece of paper to win a free car or to win a free, holiday trip.
Free anything.
Oh yeah, right? We would have put our name and our email address and our phone number. We would have
said when we were 18.
Yep. But now nobody gets my phone number and my name for free.
Yeah.
Right? It just doesn't, that's not how it works.
What is that framework called? You said it's RICE. What are those core motivators?
Yep. Your core motivational levers.
And so money obviously is a major reward lever.
Correct.
And so it makes sense that if you can monopolize and control a money supply, you can centrally manage that R in a lot of people.
Yep, exactly. And money is also part of an ideology.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that most people don't understand. The people who accuse others of being greedy completely miss the point. Most people who may appear greedy are actually not greedy.
Yeah.
They don't want money just because they want money. There's an ideology that they're carrying that is inherently tied to what the money can bring.
Yes.
The money brings security. The money brings options.
Yeah.
The money brings respect. The money brings power.
Yeah.
It's not the money itself. It's an ideology that's connected through the money.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's Mises always says no one wants to increase the quantity of money they have. Actually, it's the purchasing power that they want. So it's the options that the money affords you. And it is interesting because money has an ideological side to it, which you would think was just subjective at that point. Like we could make glasses money or bananas money or anything. But there are objective constraints to what functions as good money, which I guess is sort of super ideological in a way. So it's interesting, but even on our US dollar bills, in God we trust, right? There's ideology right there on the dollar bill. But there are also things beyond just the ideology that determine what makes good money and bad money. So it kind of crosses both worlds, it seems like.
Right. And that's what makes money such an interesting and complex thing.
Yeah.
Whenever anybody tries to boil it down to something simple, there's educational value in thinking about money as something simple, but you're missing the nuance. You're missing the more sophisticated understanding that could be had if you think of it in those terms.
Yes, as someone that's been asking a lot of people the question for 3 years solid, I have more questions than answers to this day. And I just feel very fortunate to have stumbled across this question because it seems like, what does it do? It highlights the complexity of the world and perhaps the insufficiency of language. Like we're using language by necessity to describe the world, to interact, to think, all these things. But the map is never the territory, right? The territory is always way more complicated than our map.
I like that. The map and the territory. I like that a lot.
Okay. I want to be respectful of your time. It's so cool. I could talk to you forever. The CIA, like you're becoming who you are today. Like how has it changed you? So if you go back to 18-year-old you to who you are today, I think you said you're 37.
43.
43. Okay, 43. How has that progression changed you? And I sort of asked about this earlier, I think, where you learn these skills and tactics and they become embedded in your character. But how have you, Mr. Bustamante, changed from 18 to going through this progression to your 43-year-old self today when you look back on it all?
CIA liberated me. I mean, I say that absolutely honestly. June 2008. I feel like I was set free, right? Everything that I believed about the world up until I was 27 years old, the day that I went through the farm, the first day, the first briefing about American supremacy, right? The first day of the farm, it just absolutely changed me.
The farm is training ground?
The farm is CIA's field tradecraft course.
Okay, got it.
And it's a long course. It's classified how long it is. Wikipedia talks about it, but I can't confirm or deny if it's accurate.
Okay.
But what happens is, CIA recruits a very specific type of person. And I realized that in hindsight, but not at the time. And then with that very specific type of person, they essentially teach you that the things that you have always been suspicious of are real, right? I've always been suspicious that people are not being honest, even when they say they're being honest. I've always been...
Especially when they say they're being honest.
I've always been suspicious and skeptical of authority.
Yeah.
I've always questioned whether or not authority has the right to be authority, right? And there's lists and lists of other things beyond that, right? I stay up sometimes late at night wondering whether or not I'm even telling myself the truth of what I believe, or whether I'm lying to myself, or whether I'm creating some sort of context for myself to rationalize my thoughts. Like this is the kind of stuff that goes through my head. And it did when I was younger. How I handled girls and dating relationships, and how I handled guys and friend relationships, and when I was a supervisor in the military. And it wasn't until I got to CIA that they trained me and they kind of enlightened me, like, this is the reality of how the world works. Here's how the human brain actually works. Here's how your brain works. One of the things that's really unique about CIA officers is we're oftentimes recruited because we have some kind of significant childhood trauma that leads to us being outside of the typical neurotypical bell curve. So we're higher anxiety than the average person, higher self-discipline than the average person, more rejection issues than the average person, right? So we fear rejection, we want loyalty, we trade loyalty. So we're fucked up in our own way. But you learn about it, and it's incredibly validating because now you see that everything you've been conditioned to believe is fake. It's not real. You've been conditioned to be a cog in a larger machine that works a very predictable way so that the state can function. And now you're being pulled out of that and you're being reshaped because your role to support the state is different than the cog, right? You're still a cog.
Yes.
You're just not that cog. And that was a very liberating experience for me. So my first big transformation happened in 2008. So when I built my business, a big part of what I endeavor to do every day with Everyday Spy is give people a taste of that experience that I had, that liberation, that enlightenment, that life-changing realization that I'm not crazy, right? Like I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not stupid. I'm not ignorant. I'm not selfish. I'm not manipulative. I'm actually just
human,
the type of person that understands espionage inherently.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, so that's what so you had intuitions about espionage, and this gave you a rigorous framework in which to validate those intuitions, something like that.
And thank you for asking. Thank you for being the first one to ask that question. And thank you for being the one to kind of, summarize it that way. But yeah, you're right. I had an intuition about espionage, but no training to back it. And then I got the knowledge and the systems and the framework to recognize that my intuitions that always made me feel like I was a horrible person were in fact just natural.
They were gifts, even.
Natural ordained gifts for espionage.
Yeah.
Then the second big aha moment came when I left CIA. Because the whole time I was at CIA, from 2008 to 2014, when I was a trained officer, from 2007 to 2014 when I was an officer, I never quite realized that the skills they were teaching me were also the governing tools that they were using to control me.
Of course.
Right? I was inside of a system where the people who trained me what I knew more. And they were using that superior knowledge to be able to make sure that I executed my ops and that I made sure that I put myself at personal risk and that I made sure I told the truth, right? So I was stuck inside that same KLT, RICE, secret life, public life, private life framework, but I was just subservient to the larger organization. So it wasn't until I left and got some space from it and realized how the system was failing me in my everyday life that I started asking myself the question, had the chance to reflect and say, holy smokes, like I feel like I'm failing in my current life. I'm not failing. I'm just not using the tools I was given.
Yeah.
Because before I was instructed what tools to use and when. Now I need to do that for myself. And right. And that's the second part of Everyday Spy. It's teaching people the skills so they have the life change, they have the aha moment, but then also teaching them how to control what skills they use when, so they continue to manifest that unfair advantage.
That is so freaking cool. It's kind of ironic, I guess, because it sounded like you're describing an unplugged moment from the Matrix in a way, where you're like, oh, I was plugged into this machine. I was supposed to be a cog, but I had intuitions that told me there was more to life than this. And then you come into the CIA and they're saying, yes, there is. Or actually, you've taken the red pill or whatever it is, and they show you, right, your intuitions are legitimate, and here's kind of the framework around them. Here's how people actually work, how the world actually works. And then you get a second unplugged moment, though, which is taking all that knowledge and reassimilating back into the world post-CIA.
Right.
And the ironic part in my mind is you hear Bitcoiners having a similar unplugged moment. It's like you get into Bitcoin, you start going down the rabbit hole, what is money? What is this? What is that? Next thing you know, like the whole world's like, oh my God, we're living in, as we said earlier, it's like a slave complex. There's a lot of bullshit, government's not your friend, all these things. And you're kind of left to pick up the pieces. So it's just interesting that I would never have expected to hear that going into the CIA was like going into the Bitcoin rabbit hole a little bit, but it sounds like both of them shatter your old worldview and leave you to pick up the pieces.
Or recraft something completely different, right? Yeah. And what's the hard part about it, and I'm guessing it's the same way with Bitcoin folks, is you become very isolated. All of a sudden, everybody else is still operating according to the old matrix.
Yeah.
And you're outside of that. And the only option you have is to find the other people who are outside of that.
Bingo. Bitcoiners often complain that they feel kind of isolated in their local community because there's not a lot of us in each community. But then we all come together at something like a Bitcoin conference in Miami, and it's a big love fest. Everyone's having a great time. But yeah, you're correct. That's a common complaint. So
Yeah, and that's just part of that the wolf pack
yeah,
developing for ourselves.
So now that you've been through all this and you've discovered your gifts and you're endeavoring to share them with the world, where are you headed from here? Like, what is the vision for your life, and how do you see Everyday Spy into the future?
So my original ambition when I first launched, it's funny, when I launched my podcast in 2018, I think the third or fourth episode of my podcast, I made this claim that I wanted to be a household name by the time I was 45. And I was 39 at the time. So I made that claim not because I wanted to be a household name, but because I was trying to make a point about how CIA teaches us to set ridiculously impossible goals. It's not worth it to just set a realistic goal. It's not worth it to set a goal that's a stretch, right? Set a ridiculous, completely improbable, embarrassing to say out loud kind of goal. And then see how close to that goal you get. So there I was in 2019 recording a podcast episode where I told the world, which was 11 listeners at the time, right, that I set this goal to be a household name by the time I was 45. And then I was going to disappear. I was going to take all of my toys and fucking go home, right, and turn my company over to an executive, a C-suite, and let them run it. And I'll just take a passive paycheck and just disappear with my family and be with them, be with my kids when they're in their teenage years, and be with my wife while we're still young enough to enjoy our youth. Since then, I am now 43. I have been referenced in popular media as a household name. I don't think I am a household name. I think I'm a YouTube-ish name, but that's about at best, right? But we now have TV projects, film projects, book projects that are making it so I can't disappear at 45. So I've had to adjust my ambitions. So now I'm targeting 47, 48 before I take my toys and go home and fall off the map. So I've got 5 more years to really have a good time building this business out. I got to find my new CEO. I got to find my new C-suite. I've got to find other ex-CIA and NSA and DIA folks who are going to come in and teach the next generation. But I didn't build this business to be famous. I built the business to give skills to real people that they can use to get a real advantage. And I'm not needed for that. That's why it's not called Andrew Bustamante Incorporated, right? It's called Everyday Spy. There will always be people leaving CIA who want to give back to the American public and teach the skills that they used for success in the field. So that's the mission, that's the goal. And, you know, if I'm lucky, I'll still talk to you when I'm 49 years old, but nobody else will be able to find it.
If I'm so lucky, I still get to talk to you when you're 49. I think that's a really cool mission. You're taking these badass skills that we've learned through really, like we said, all of human history, right? That have culminated in the intelligence inside of institutions like the CIA. And then you're giving that back to people to use in their everyday life. That seems ennobling and not enabling. You're improving people's competence, right? Because if they have this knowledge, they have these frameworks, there must be many other people out there with intuition similar to you that also think they're crazy or bad. And now you can just give them this gift of saying, no, this is actually how human minds work and how society works. And you can use these to your advantage in a professional sense, a personal sense, etc. It's cool. It's really cool stuff you're doing.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
And thanks for letting me talk about it. And thanks for asking such awesome questions, man. This was a joy.
Yeah, this was great. So we've got you for at least 5 more years, right?
You got me.
So we'll get you back here at least once a year for the next 5 years.
I won't say no to you, man.
Dude, thank you so much for doing this. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, the fastest way to find me is to look up everydayspy.com. That's my homepage. If you're a podcast fan, look up my podcast. It's called the Everyday Espionage Podcast. Or if you just Google my name, Andrew Bustamante, you'll find me on all platforms, and you'll find your way to whether you want to listen to me, watch me, or hear me.
Beautiful. Dude, thanks again.
I appreciate it. Thank you.